Saturday is when we watch the real stuff, the real deal. Not your typical CNN socialists, not your Bernie Sanders, not your AOCs. We watch the real deal because what we've discovered is that if you watch legitimately socialist content from about 5 years ago, that content is today the talking points of the Democratic Party and the woke left. And so Socialism Saturday is an opportunity for us to preview where all of this is going if we are somehow unable to turn back the woke left cultural revolution that has taken over every major institution in this country. This is serious. Okay, it's kind of fun. We try to make it fun, but it is actually serious. We are going to get today a preview of what the socialists and indeed even the communists want to do to our country. I want to thank Tiggs for becoming a member on the channel. Becoming a member on the channel supports the work I do, and I really do appreciate it. Thank you, Tiggs, for that. And I got to tell you, I got some good stuff today, guys. I've got some good stuff because this morning I stumbled on an amazing YouTube channel called Red May. And this is a YouTube channel out of Seattle, because of course it would be Seattle, where during the month of May, apparently, they just do an epic amount of socialist content. Like legitimately, like, look at all this content. There's some crazy stuff here. I went through and I picked out a couple of options for us to watch tonight, and I want to just show you some of the glorious things that they have on this channel. I want to watch this at some point. We're not going to watch this one tonight, but the very first thing I noticed on this Red May channel is just called freedom. And let me read you the description of freedom. Each year, ye who grew up in Stalinist Albania and lived through the frenzied free market transformation that followed, says, I begin my Marx course at the London School of Economics by telling my students that many people think of socialism as a theory of material relations, class struggle, and economic justice, but that in reality, something more fundamental animates it. Socialism, I tell them, is above all a theory of human freedom, of how to think about progress in history, and how we adapt to circumstances, but also try to rise above them. Yes, guys, socialism is indeed a theory of freedom. But we're not going to watch that one today. We're not going to watch that one today. I found this one. There is no unhappy revolution, which, I mean, some people like Lily Tang Williams might disagree with the notion that there is no unhappy revolution. We could watch that one. We're not going to today. How about this one? What we talk about when we talk about Marx. I think, am I frozen? No, I'm not frozen. Hang on. Okay. I thought I was frozen based on the chat, guys. I guess I'm not, though. So what happened when we talk about Marx? Nope, we're not going to watch that one. We're not going to watch that one. Here's the one that I thought we would start with as our first introduction to the Red May channel. Yesterday's tomorrow. On the loneliness of communist specters and the reconstruction of the future. Let's read the description. The Communist Project in the 20th century grew out of utopian desire to oppose oppression and abolish class struggles, to give individual lives collective meaning. The attempts to realize these ideals have become a series of colossal failures. In her new book, Yesterday's Tomorrow, Binney examines the catastrophes, the Hitler-Stalin pact, the Great Terror of 1937, the failure of the European left to prevent National Socialism, Stalin's rise to power, and the bloody rebellion at, I don't know how to pronounce that. Turning our heads away from these events, she argues, wishing to keep our utopia free from past slaughter lionizes only those revolutionaries who perished before they could make it far enough. This is literally a presentation about how real communism has never been tried because the real revolutionaries couldn't make it far enough. I just love this stuff. I love it so much. I do. I do. So we're going to watch this presentation tonight, and we're going to hear exactly how they envision real communism forming, and hopefully how they make it past the failures that communism has experienced over and over and over again. And if this presentation turns out to be boring and dull, guess what? We have about 8,000 other presentations that we can choose from on this channel that are probably just as great. And just and yeah. So that's what we're doing tonight, guys. We're watching some socialism. And if you disagree with my selection, let me know in the chat right now. This is a time to speak or forever hold your peace, because I could still change my mind. We could still watch something else. Maybe we'll switch back and forth. Maybe we'll mix it up. Who really knows how Socialism Saturday will unfold today? But guys, that's what we have on the docket. Now, I do just want to let everyone know before we get into the video for today. First of all, please mount that like button for me. Please subscribe to the channel if you haven't already. We do Socialism Saturdays on Saturdays at 6 p.m. We also do other content all throughout the week. Lots of stuff going on. But tomorrow, for something fun, in my community Discord, supporter Discord, we are going to be watching The Crow at 8 p.m. This is movie night. We're doing regular movie nights in my community in the supporter Discord. If you're a supporter on Patreon or on Locals, and I'll tell you how to do that in a second, you can come and join us for The Crow tomorrow night. I will be posting the information out to my supporters sometime tomorrow to be able to get into the Discord if you have not already. So please join us. I think it's going to be a really great event. I haven't seen this movie in years, and I'm really, really excited about it. And if you do want to support the work I'm doing, you can head over to activelyunwoke.com/support, and you can join up on Patreon for a monthly gift. You can also join up on Locals for a monthly gift. All of the information is in the description below. And I do hope you guys come and join us. I really do have, I think, the best community on all of Locals. I'm much more active in my Locals community than I am on Patreon. Patreon is for people who see the value in my work and want to support it, and you can get some great perks on there as well. But I'm much more active in my Locals community, to be honest, and I do appreciate wherever you guys choose to support me. But that's going to be going on, and that's some of the perks you'll get: movie night, 2 Zoom calls a week, stuff like that. That's all coming up tomorrow, and I'm really excited about that. But what I'm really excited about is getting started with socialism. Now, before we get started, as per usual, I do actually have some beer with me, so I'm going to pour myself a drink. You guys can let me know if you're drinking anything in the chat tonight. Ooh, Tiggs, Everclear? Really? Really? Kurt's got a glass of wine? Yeah, let us know what you're drinking in the chat. Let me get my beer. I'm going to be starting with a pina colada beer, just for bought from yesterday. Hang on. So I've got four craft beers. Don't worry, I'm not going to drink all these on the stream. But we've got our pina colada beer. I'll tell you about that in a second. I've got a white chocolate plum beer. I've got a pumpkin IPA, which I didn't realize was an IPA when I bought it. I'm sure I'll drink it at some point. I've also got Ambrosia, which is an amazing beer. Ambrosia with that Edward Scissorhands. If you see that in a craft beer store, you pick that up. Hang on. But the one I'm going to be starting with today, because it was the second highest vote getter in yesterday's happy hour, is this Liquid South beer. And it is a pina colada beer. It is pineapple, coconut, and marshmallow. So let's crack that open. And let's see how this is. Oh, holy shit, it's blue. It just sprayed me in the eye and it's blue. It's blue. I was not expecting the pina colada beer to be blue. I got to be honest. It does smell like pina colada. Hang on. It's fucking blue. This is, oh my God. I like this beer even more now. Oh my God. I have never had a beer this color before. Cheers to everyone. I should have gotten a red beer. Now that I'm thinking about it, total failure. It matches. This beer matches my wall. Look at it. It's so close to matching my wall. But cheers to everyone. Next week, I'll get a red beer for Socialism Saturday. I thought that beer was going to be orange. I was not expecting it to be blue. Hang on. And it does, in fact, taste like a pina colada. It does indeed. It is gorgeous, Alexandra. Alexandra, God damn it. I can't even pronounce people's names today. This is going to bode well for us. But no, it is a gorgeous color beer. I'm really enjoying it. Yeah, the beer disappears in front of the wall. Well, that wall's going to get painted soon. I know I've been saying this for like a year. That wall's going to get painted. I haven't decided what color it's going to get painted yet. Maybe a gray, maybe a dark purple. But the wall's going to get painted, so, we got to enjoy it while we can. All right, guys, let's get this party started. Let's watch us some socialism. Oh my God. Lord, pray for us in this endeavor, and hopefully we learn a thing or two. All right, let's go.
Hey, everybody, and welcome to the third event in this year's Red May 2021, our fifth year. Can you believe it? It's amazing. We've got a large number of events coming up. I think we have 40 more events for the month. And welcome to the third event in this year's Red May 2021.
They were echoing. Already the technical problems. Okay.
Echoing to myself as
all right. I should preface this. I always forget to preface when we first start Socialism Saturday. So number one of the things that we've learned is that socialists suck at content or at like technology. Well, they suck at content too. Like they we'll talk about that in a second, but they suck at technology. They usually have technical difficulties. It's their content, not mine. I can't do anything about their technical difficulties, try as I might. But the other thing I want you to know, if this is your first Socialism Saturday, these people will talk like they are speaking a different language. If you don't understand what they're saying, just hang out. Just hang in there. I promise you at some point it's going to become clear, but these people really do speak a completely different language than like normal people do. And so it can be a little hard to understand it at first. So I think that it is important that we listen to them. I think it is important that we understand their ideas because, again, this is a sneak preview of where the Democratic Party is going in like a couple of years. So we should probably know about it. I do try to help translate as best I can, but understand that I'm still new at this too. So I'm looking in the chat. I'm looking for your explanations as well. If you say something insightful in the chat that I agree with, or maybe even if I disagree with it, I'll display it on the screen for others to learn from. But if you're confused, if you don't understand what they're saying, you are not alone. You are not alone, and we're going to get through it together. And there does reach a point where you start understanding more and more of what you're saying. So don't be surprised, or what they're saying rather. So don't be surprised if that happens, and don't let it deter you from participating in Socialism Saturday.
As we say it. Well, let me clue you in quickly about our schedule for the rest of the week. We have on Thursday, tomorrow at 11 a.m. Pacific time, Real Abstraction in the Mind, but not from there, with Gian Moreno, Jali Mansour, Johanna Goss, and Sven Ludiken. That's based on a book in Verso about real abstraction in art. And then at 4 p.m., we have Red Nation Rising, from border town violence to native liberation.
Red Nation
David Correa,
Rising.
Jennifer Nez Denetdale, Chris Latre is the moderator. On Friday at 11 a.m. Pacific time, Survival and Resistance, Mutual Aid in Disastrous Time, a kind of seminar around Dean Spade's book on mutual aid, with Adrienne Marie Brown, Chandan Reddy, Dean Spade, Clee Bentley, and Naomi Klein. And at 3 p.m., what we talk about when we talk about Marx, that's Friday, May 7th, is a conversation between Jason Smith and Paul Maddock Jr. You will know them from the Brooklyn Rail, the Field Notes page, which is one of the best places to go for a sense of the current moment. We are not funded by any institution.
Because they don't believe in capitalism.
Tell us where we can send the money if we want to support.
They don't believe in capitalism, except when they do believe in capitalism.
Out of the kindness of strangers, they reach into their pockets and take out those credit cards.
We have information just below the YouTube, in the YouTube description. We've got a link to the Patreon, and on our website, there's a link to donate as well. So you can just
great. Okay, so the website
Oh, she's wearing makeup. That's different. The women usually don't wear makeup.
You can either you can donate.
I mean,
on the Patreon
her
or
hair
go
looks
to,
very
Fan
socialist.
the Flames of Red May, which is our GoFundMe. But now let's get on to the current panel. I'm very happy to welcome all the way from Berlin, I believe.
But beer tastes good.
Bini Adamczak, who is the author of the inimitable Communism for Kids,
Communism
which I'm sure some people
kids.
Are lucky enough to have bought.
Holy shit.
And read. Bini is a philosopher and artist who writes on political theory, queer politics, and the past future of revolutions, particularly in this new book, Yesterday's Tomorrow, on the loneliness of communist specters and the reconstruction of the future. We're happy to have Seattle's own Michael Hart as a co-discussant. Michael, of course, is the author with Tony Negri of Empire, Multitude, Commonwealth, Assembly, and of course, many other books. So let's get to it. I think in the beginning, Bini, you want to read a section of the book to start off? Have at it.
Exactly. Thank you, Philip.
Oh!
Thank you, everybody, for the invitation.
Oh!
I'm very excited about
I wasn't expecting that voice. That was a surprise. I wasn't expecting this to also be a queer presentation. Well, that just adds a whole other dimension and layer to this, doesn't it?
this panel and the chance to discuss the book, Yesterday's Tomorrow, on the loneliness of communist specters and the reconstruction of the future, book that I wrote in 2007. At least that's the date when it was published in Germany. But since the topic is the communist revolution and especially the history of the Soviet Union, I think it's not outdated at all. And the opposite might be true. All the questions raised regarding the relationship of our present, our future, and the past are still very valid and important, I think, for the discussion today.
I'm going to say that would be a yes.
I will be reading a collage of the first 3 chapters of the book. The book consists of 6 chapters, so it's a short book, an essay, you might say. And I will be reading 30 minutes to start and give you also an impression what the method of this book is. So I'm gonna jump right into it. Yesterday's morning. The last warm rays of the sun expire. Not a single bird takes off from the leafless trees. Not a single wing beat.
I like that we're getting an essay. That's kind of nice.
They have forgotten the point of flying, have lost the faith in being borne up by the air. The creatures perch on the slender branches. Slowly, the long shadows of the telegraph poles, once meant to connect the continent to come, retreat in the harvested fields. The odd-forgotten plate of brass waits motionless in the windless early dusk. In the distance, scattered woodlands mingle with border villages history forgot. It's getting dark. Just maybe, though, there is a bit of light left. A fleeting night offers a glimpse of landscape.
Is anyone else a little creeped out by this person's background? Because I'm a little creeped out by this person's background. Just put your thoughts in the chat.
Animated by unchanged fieldwork. Here and there, the dew clings to the waves of grain. The first cars take to the road, and for a few kilometers, they pass alongside the railway. Something warm seeps through the tiny cracks in the vehicle.
German.
At times, the fog still clouds the view, which even without it would not be clear. After the day-long journey from Moscow or further away onto the Russian border, their eyes can grow weary watching the fields, which rush past and yet, in their immensity, seem stationary. But the eyes of the German anti-fascists, the communist emigrants, see nothing. There are no windows in the barred compartments. Perhaps outside, the first patches of light are grazing the ground while the mountains of the horizon stretch their stony heads upward into the dawning day. Or maybe it's already daytime. Possibly, even probably, it is pride out, because the weather bends seldom to the history writer's metaphoric wishes. A radiant day, white from the snow on the summits in the distance, from the glittering of the wide rivers, the Polish lakes. The almost noonday sun stands in the otherwise empty sky, warms the roue of the Stolipinski carriages, rolling prisons where the inmates sit 7 to a car. The rattling of the train makes conversation between one compartment and the other impossible. For a time, songs are audible and encouraging words, but then, all at once, they fall silent. The wardens bring water and generous helpings of food, but now the prisoners have lost their appetite. Why now? Just eat. There's plenty of time for you to go hungry later, one of the soldiers tells them kindly. The soldiers are from the NKVD, the People's Commissariat for Internal Affairs, the Russian Soviet secret police, and they have been ordered to bring a sealed cargo across the border, silent human cargo. When the train slows down, the sun perhaps reaches its zenith, nature shows itself blind to history. In the train station, the anti-fascist prisoners step out, walk on foot for the final wooded sketch. On the train bridge from...
Is she talking about, like, them taking people to the gulag? What is she talking about? I'm so confused right now about, like, this is the beginning of the book. And by the way, I appreciate that the book is being read to us. It gives us more insight into what these people are reading. But what the fuck is she talking about? And yes, I'm going to use the she pronoun. I'm going to do it. I know people have feelings about that. If you guys have any ideas, please shout them in, because I have no idea what's going on right now.
Brest-Litovsk, the nearly established border, the road comes to an end. Other soldiers come from the other side of the bridge, raise their hands to their caps to greet the officers of the NKVD. The names are read out, the exchange begins. Those who resist and panic are shoved. The Jews amongst them are received with anti-Semitic tirades by the German soldiers of the SS.
Oh, she's talking about, okay, World War II Germany. Got it.
A train
So
of many trains, of forgotten trains. Special trains in which the NKVD transports German or Austrian communists.
So you mean, she's talking about how communists were arrested by the National Socialists. Isn't that interesting? Okay. All right. This might be getting somewhere.
To the German border, deliver them to the Gestapo. Of the 1,000 deportees, more than 300 communists, Jews, and anti-fascists. A multitude of transports, the first already in 1935, the last in May 19...
So am I correct in saying that she's talking about when the Nazis were rising in Germany and they transported all of the communists out of Germany? Maybe? Like, I don't understand that exactly, but that seems to be what she's... Kurt, if you have, I bet Kurt's going to know the answer. Kurt, I'm so glad you're here. Only after Stalin and Hitler had their fallout. Kurt, what year did Stalin and Hitler have their fallout? Because she's talking like it's like the late 1930s. And by the way, I am beyond positive that this person is going to say many things that are not historically true at all. And so if you catch things that are not historically true in what they're saying, please shout them out in the chat so we can all learn about this together, because I don't know enough about this time period to be like, I'm not an expert on this by any stretch of the imagination.
1941, a month before the outbreak of the war. They arrived in the Soviet Union as supporters of the revolution, and most remained until 1933 or 1934. Some of them...
Yeah, she's talking about how Germany brought put communists out of Germany and into the Soviet Union. That's what she's talking about.
Left only later, after years of fighting in the underground, building and rebuilding the Communist Party, the KPD, Communist Party of Germany, without cease
Kurt says
until their
late
cover was
40s,
blown and
41.
they had to escape. Many of them have been in German prisons, have suffered torture, some in the first concentration camps. They are anti-fascists. They even have the state seal of approval. And the
Wait, did she just say that Germany was putting communists into concentration camps? Is that true?
Soviet authorities are strict in these matters. Only those who engaged in active resistance according to the standards of the KPD are allowed to immigrate. Anti-Semitic persecution isn't enough to qualify for an offer of asylum. Persecuted by the Nazis, fleeing the threat of the camps, these communists flee into Russian exile, into the Soviet Republic, the fatherland of the workers, of the proletariat, to Moscow,
Yes.
the reddest city on the planet.
Free to the bustling communist utopia that is Moscow and the Soviet Union, where everyone's dreams come true.
Protection is not what they hoped for most, but the chance to go on contributing to the construction of socialism, to organize resistance to Germany in exile. Very few of them mean to stay. They want to go back with new papers, with a different mission. And back they go, but unarmed, not as revolutionaries, as Soviet soldiers, but rather as their captives. Not all the deported anti-fascists are freed after their interrogation to labor for the German cause or to fight as soldiers in the German Wehrmacht.
Okay, B. Martin is saying communists had their own symbol like Jews had the Star of David on their prison clothing. Communists had something. I had no idea about that. That's fascinating. All right, fair enough. Boom Her says they put commies, gypsies, gays into the camps. Okay, that makes sense. So did homosexuals, gypsies, etc. Okay, fair enough.
The Gestapo's orders exclude those who, quote, were active Marxist militants prior to emigration, who engaged in anti-German political activities, or who continued to cling to their communist conviction, as well as those of Jewish lineage. For these people, return means to prison and ghettos, to concentration and extermination camps. Only a few survive, the rest will die there. Lublin, Neuengamme, and Mauthausen, in Auschwitz and Majdanek. Like spokes in a wheel, which seem to stand still, then turn backward. Once it reaches a certain speed, these trains travel back from socialist Russia into National Socialist Germany, in the opposite direction of the sealed train that, decades before, had brought Lenin to Petrograd to wage revolution. Unceasing progress, which was meant to push history toward communism with an inevitable leap from the first revolution in 1917 to the second, then to the worldwide one, ends here. Not halfway, how nice that might have been, not at the beginning, but even earlier, in the camps. Almost naturally those of the enemy, but also incomprehensibly those of one's allies. Double betrayal. Betrayal of anti-fascism, betrayal of communism. You rarely get the first without the second, and you never have the second without the first. But above all, betrayal of the communists of one comrade by the other. Betrayed to those who they have fought against for the better part of their lives from 1918 on. Betrayed by those for whom they have sacrificed their lifetime, for whom they were willing to sacrifice their lives. Without a name they die, without a struggle, most of them not at the barricades but behind them, in Moscow prisons, deep in the Siberian steppes, back at the German camps. But how are we to remember them? How do we remember those of whom there is so little left to remember? And above all, with whom do we remember them? Whom do we raise the alarm to? Whom do we warn or turn to for help? Who do we call to in the name of a justice deferred, past due, of zealous partisanship for those the party betrayed? With whom do we mourn the lost, the murdered, the abandoned revolutionaries?
Yeah, I want to say, like, I agree, Kazmar. Like, the chat is on fire tonight. I'm learning a lot from the chat as well. So if you're watching on, listen, I always stream on alt tech platforms like Odyssey, Rockfin, Rumble. I'm on Getter. But if you're watching on any of those platforms, the YouTube chat is quite frankly on fire right now. So I would suggest checking it out if you're interested. If you're not, that's cool too. Feel free to remain on the other platforms.
Abandoned in the train cars, hiding out in another country, betrayed in the concentration camps, subdued in tiny apartments in Moscow, in jail cells in Siberian work camps. They have no allies left, no friends across the border, no fellow fighters, no comrades back home, no one who takes heart at the thought of them, no one they might think of to fire their hopes. Who to share their loneliness with? At least that. At least to offer them companionship, imaginary, belated companionship. Perhaps like Vaso Milic, a character from a novel by Manesh Berber, they carry out conversations with themselves as they await arrest. Conversations in truth addressed to friends across the border, the long deceased comrades, who are the only ones capable of measuring the distance that separates the fall of 1939 from October 1970. To them, and to them alone, to those they shared the experience of revolution with, the memory of that historically unique, world-spanning hope, could they convey the hopeless disappointment that has beset them. For a brief moment, they were granted, or at least caught a glimpse of, another life, the end of their history and the history of their ancestors, and then it was taken away. Perhaps nothing will ever compensate for this loss, certainly not in their brief lives or in any moment.
Good call on the caption. Sorry about that.
All the way down to this very day. Rather, the loss itself will become lost. For their successors, this loss will be the precondition of their political existence, the basis of their political experience. Even with great effort, they will remain incapable of understanding this revolutionary disappointment, though we, all the way down to this very day, are the children in the strict historical scientific sense of this disappointment. It's not us who experienced this disappointment, but quite the opposite. We were made out of it. In 1937, that long year that begins with the first Moscow show trial in August of 1936 and lasts until the last show trial in March of 1938, the October Revolution celebrates its 20th, its last anniversary. In 1937, amid the roar of the Great Terror, the Russian Revolution founders drowns in a plan like rush chokes on itself. Independently of where it came from, independent of when exactly it began, the counter-revolution now attains its final triumph. Because it is, without a single doubt, the counter-revolution that reaches its conclusion in that year, 1937. It is such because it brings the revolution to an end, buries, first of all, above all, the revolutionaries themselves. Of the 1,900 delegates of the 17th Party Congress in 1934, 1,100 of them are imprisoned, disappeared, shot, buried after not even 5 years. Of the 139 party secretaries...
So if I am correct, and again, please tell me if I'm wrong, it sounds like she's talking about the failure of the Russian Revolution, or when, I mean, the Russian Revolution didn't really fail too much later, I think, but the initial failings, like the things that led to the failure of the Russian Revolution, like when things started to go sideways with the Russian Revolution. I'm kind of questioning because again, this is not something I actually do want to study the Russian Revolution more in depth. I did in college, and I need to remind myself of it. But like, is she talking about like maybe like things were going pretty good. She's talking about Stalin's purges. Thank you, Kurt. So, but so is this like? Okay, I don't know. We're just gonna let her talk. I don't know. If you have more context, I don't know. I don't know this era of history. I'm completely uneducated in this way. So this is me trying to be a beginner's mind about this to try to understand this.
It's listed in the 1936 directory of Moscow. Only 7 remain in office. In 1937, the Red Army loses more officers than any army before in peacetime. The exiled Japanese Communist Party is decimated. The Polish Party is...
Kurt, thank God Kurt's here. The revolution itself failed immediately because Lenin's attempt at full socialism had to be reversed in order to prevent total starvation. Thank you, Kurt. Well, it's hard to follow because she's not giving any context around what she's talking about. She just wrote an essay, essentially. They're going to do a discussion of the essay after after she reads this. Yeah, well, I knew this part. I knew the Russian Revolution started in like 1905 when the Tsar and his family were murdered, and that was because people were starving. The people rebelled, and they took out the monarchy.
Thoroughly liquidated. In Leningrad, the capital of the revolution, as in the rest of Russia, 90% of all party cadres are locked up. The bugs, nests of the Trotskyite fascists are smoked out and destroyed. The counter-revolution is exhaustive. From Voronezh, the party functionary Andrei Andreev telegraphs Moscow. Here, the Politburo no longer exists. All cadres have been imprisoned as enemies. Now back to Rostov. Without a doubt, it is the Stalinist counter-revolution that liquidates the revolution. And at the same time, it surely is not. At no point does this counter-revolution declare itself to be a counter-revolution. At no point does it declare war on the achievements of the revolution. Indeed, what it declares war on is the counter-revolution. Not from without does it strike the socialist homeland, but from within, from the headquarters of the regime, from the center of the party. It organizes no military putsch, summons no allied troops from other countries, but rather unmasks on its own constantly, tirelessly, the omnipresent conspirators, spies, agents of enemy powers. It marches not under the white banner, but under the red. And it fights not in the name of order, of freedom, of the market, but in the name of the revolution, of socialism, of plans.
It fights not in the for freedom of the market, but for the revolution of socialism. Good writer, I have to say. Away with words.
For it was planned, the great wave of terror, centrally, bureaucratically. A state socialist terror plan, just as precise and just as imprecise as state socialist economic planning. On July 30, 1937, order number 447 is issued. It demands the arrest of 332,000 people, divided into two categories. 259,000 who are to be imprisoned for 8 to 10 years, and 73,000 who are to be executed.
Is that the
repression, like production, should be carried out according to quotas. And the quotas, as always in the realm of the brave Stakhanov workers, will be exceeded. In this socialist competition, the cadres outdo each other to prove their diligence, just as a certain Khrushchev, later renowned as an anti-Stalinist, who orders the execution of 55,000 suspects in response to a quota of 50,000.
Seriously?
Soon, after just 1 month, the regional cadres demand an increase in their respective quotas. Soon, other orders succeed order number 447. After the liquidation of the former kulaks, criminals, and other anti-Soviet elements, comes the liquidation of criminal elements, and then the liquidation of families of enemies of the people. When the wave of
isn't this massive like amount of like executions, like isn't that kind of an indication that none of this worked? Am I just asking like a dumb question? Like, cause this doesn't seem to be good. It doesn't seem like a quality outcome. Isn't that an indication of what we can always expect with this type of thing?
terror runs down, 1,345,000 people have been sentenced, 682,000 of them to death. These judgments, representing 85% of all death sentences handed down during the Stalinist era, are carried out during the festivities marking the 20th anniversary of the revolution, accompanied by parades and merrymaking, framed by radiant banners. Life has become better, life has become more cheerful. The future promised by communism never became present, nor did it remain future. This is the meaning of all talk of the end of history.
Yes, exactly.
It is the realization of
the future of communism never was realized. Exactly. You just said it.
The Popperian motto, which seems to have set the mood for the world after 1990, at least for 2 decades. The world has been vindicated, may not be the best of all worlds, but is the best of all worlds that exist. It is sympathetically Saturday compared to the mindless white lies of Stalinism. But right from the first, this slogan, which presents itself in the rhetoric of compromise as dispassionate cool-headedness, is beset with a dreadful sorrow. They have not stopped to linger because things are so nice, but rather because they lack the courage to go on. Movement is pointless. This is what makes the jubilant cries of the Cold War victors so unconvincing.
Yeah, exactly.
They lack all joy. Instead of relief at averting looming danger or shared joy at the newfound fortune of the former oppressed Russia's newly minted billionaires, it expresses something resembling embittered malevolence. The Schadenfreude those who stayed home feel for their siblings drowned at sea. Victory is thus tarnished by foregoing defeat. Anti-communists didn't win, they capitulated to fate. The anti-communists do not win, they give up. They give up their dreams.
Wait.
Apologetics for the status quo are so based not on
the anti-communists don't win, they give up their dreams. All right.
The celebration of the reality, but on the restriction of mourning for the possible. Not on fear for what has been achieved, but on fear of what is achievable. Both, however, have their basis in history, and this is the rationale for this book. Whoever doesn't want to talk about Stalinism had better keep quiet about communism. But what can be said about Stalinism by those who refuse to hear about communism? Those who wish to write the history of this past without writing about the history of that future that was buried in it. Just like value theory, relative value theory, the comparative analysis of domination always avoids the very thing it oscillates around eternally, domination itself. And domination itself can only be understood in light of its possible abolition. The possibility of freedom from domination does exist, but not a priori, only historically. This is the advent of communism. What the communists promised was the abrogation of all dominance. And as long as they are remembered, they will never cease to have promised that. It is common for dominance to dress up as freedom. Since the bourgeois revolution at the latest, these are almost the only garments it has donned. But something has changed ever since the domination of those who fought against all domination in the world has entered the world. And all those who count off all the roads paved with good intentions, or pronounce in resignation that power has won out over all ideas ignore this something. Man is born bad, is the many-faced formula this work of mourning concludes in. A historical melancholy disguised as realism on the social level. Man is the enemy of man. He has always slaughtered his own and will go on doing so in the future. War yesterday, war today, war tomorrow. That sounds dreadful, but the reality is far more dreadful than that. For the assertion of the repetition of the same is actually a consolation that covers over the true horror. If it was always bad, then really nothing bad has happened, nor can anything really bad happen. To have learned everything from the past, and therefore to be incapable of learning anything from the future, even when the only thing there was to learn was fear, is a pernicious consolation. A consolation that can no longer console, since the future has been promised.
She's saying that, like, the idea that, okay, please tell me if I am correct in my interpretation, that the idea that the non-communists are trying to assert is that man is inherently bad and has always been bad. But then if we take that assumption at face value, that means man hasn't been bad, because if everyone is bad, no one is bad. Kurt says, this is the insane intersection of utopian communists and libertarians, but the utopian communists have no trouble using domination to get into power and promise to stop later. Kurt, that is probably the most succinct explanation of what we're hearing that I've heard so far tonight, and I'm so appreciative that you're here. This is all doublespeak. This person is, and this person doesn't actually seem like a bad person, but like they're speaking in doublespeak, which is why it's confusing.
In which the lessons of the past are no longer valid, in which there is no more cause for fear. Stalinism, this crime against the future of mankind, is so not just any dominance, not just one more form of dominance, but instead the first and paradigmatic link in an unbroken chain of disappointments that could only...
Oh, she's just like, Stalin was a disappointment. You know, Stalin was problematic because Stalin was just but a disappointment in a long series of disappointments in trying to make socialism work. The reason that socialism didn't work in real life is because Stalin was a disappointment.
Be so devastating because they were based on a hope unknown to earlier generations. That is why the first reproach against anti-communism must be that of downplaying the crimes of Stalinism. Not because an idea was murdered alongside the people in the gulags, how cynical, but because communism alone brought forth into the world the historically
they just haven't tried to write Stalin.
To accept no disenfranchisement, to tolerate no more degradation. Since that time, even the slightest injustice grows greater, and the greatest pain hurts exponentially more. Thank you.
Oh, thank God. The reading is done. Okay, we can move on and not read a fable anymore. I mean, that wasn't bad, though. The writing was very good. The writing was great. Subject matter,
Michael,
a little
would you like
murky,
to,
but the writing was good.
Share some reflections with us before we get into the
Yes,
discussion?
please share some reflections.
Absolutely. And in fact, what I'd like to do, yeah, and thanks, Beanie, for that reading. I'd want to try to pose 3 topics for discussion that they aren't directly questions or topics internal to the book. There are things that I think that are raised by the book that I think that Beanie and others here might find interesting. 2 historical themes and then one political one. And I'll try to lay them all out first just so you get an idea where I'm going. You know, with the first one, the first historical claim, really the question is this: what are the historical conditions that make this book possible? And, you know, maybe to start, I was reflecting while reading the book that about 20 years ago, I was giving a lecture. It was some relatively large audience, if I remember right. And I was, of course, talking about communism and revolution, blah, blah, blah. And I remember somebody stood up in the audience in the middle and tried to stop the thing and started yelling at me, but what about the crimes of communism? And he kept going on about it until they finally convinced him to leave the thing. And my first response was, well,
you didn't answer the question, though.
I think Beanie's telling me, no, Michael, that is your history, and try to live within it. And so I guess that's where I'm trying to pose this first question about, because I think that it's different, that this book would not have been possible. Well, I'm not saying that Beanie couldn't have written it. You could be on some other universe than me. But that there's certain things about the last 20, 30 years that have changed. So yeah, let me put it this way, even just to give two markers in this. Yeah, in fact, here's just a preview of what I'm thinking is that this kind of reflection, I'm not saying this book in particular, but this kind of reflection marks the end of the Cold War, or that we've entered into the post-Cold War. So here's two events. In 1997, there was a publication of this book called The Black Book of Communism, which made a lot of what do you call it? Newspaper journalism, you know, reports and everything. And it was written by anti-communists, you know, reactionaries of various sorts. They each have articles about the crimes of communism. And the only reaction that seemed possible at the time was to then publish a book about the crimes of capitalism. Obvious, not very difficult to do. But I think at that time, it would have been impossible. 1997 was still within the post-Cold War, you know, still within a Cold War frame. It would have been impossible not to respond to that kind of anti-communism, showing the crimes of various done in the name of communism, except with that kind of reaction. Then I'm also wondering, it's a little bit closer to us. I was thinking of the 2009 conference in London organized by Slavoj Žižek and Alain Badiou. I think it went under the title, The Idea of Communism. This is right around the time that Beanie's writing the book, I think, because the book comes out in German in 2 years after this. And I think that was a very different operation than what Beanie's doing. And I mean, because there was a series, it's not just Alain Badiou's idea of communism, his way of some way separating the idea of communism from its history, from its being put into practice previously, etc. That, in my experience of that conference, and then there were a series of other conferences organized in the same way in different cities, was a series of affirmations of communism in the context of the end of the Cold War. And I include myself in it, because I was at that 2009 conference. Yeah, in fact, with the first one here, let me actually read two passages one that Beanie already read, but one that she didn't, I think. With that first one, at the time of the Black Book of Communism and this anti-communist.
This guy seems really conflicted about whether or not the evils of communism should be acknowledged in any way. Like, he started off by saying that, like, he was presenting at this conference where someone wanted to talk about the evils of communism and they didn't let him speak. And because, like, the evils of communism is not part of, like, his story, so he didn't want to acknowledge them. But the book that we just heard the excerpt from, for, like, it seemed like 17 hours that it took to read that, like, the book that we just heard the excerpts from is explicitly acknowledging the evils of communism. It's just saying the typical thing, which is that they didn't go far enough. They didn't get there. They didn't do it right. So this guy seems a little conflicted about whether or not the evils of communism should be acknowledged. But apparently something happened in the late 90s and the, like, 2000s that after the end of the Cold War, but, like, a while after the end of the Cold War, if we're honest, because the Cold War was, like, a while ago. and I'm working this through in my head. I'm thinking this through. I'm thinking out loud right now. So don't take this as the gospel. I could be wrong. But like he's saying that like something happened in the past to make it suddenly okay to acknowledge the evils of communism where they couldn't acknowledge it before. B. Martin says, I'm getting a lot of hits on this conference he mentioned in 2009 in London. It must have been major. That second time, he couldn't even say crimes of communism. He actually just said, yeah, you're right about that. He seems really conflicted. Like, do I acknowledge that communism did bad things? Do I acknowledge it? Do I acknowledge it? Do I acknowledge it?
You know, essentially,
he's working through some
post-Cold
feelings.
War
Is what's happening. He's working through feelings.
What the Cold War was. So now I'm reading on pages 55 and 56, a little bit, I think, after where Beatty arrived at, which is, she writes, the responsibility for clarifying the question of why the attempt at liberation turned into the most gruesome despotism falls not on the monarchist counter-revolutionaries, on the whites, not even on the capitalists, but on the communists. In other words, that operation that was then really the task of anti-communists really should be the task of communists.
I mean, when you frame it in that respect, you actually have to have respect for the person that we heard from at the beginning, because I mean, they're basically saying like, we should probably answer for how fucked up this was implemented. You know, you got to respect that. That couldn't have been an easy thing to put out there in the community that they existed. It's kind of like when I read conservatives the Riot Act all the time and I tell conservatives all the ways in which they suck, and conservatives could have taken that information and learned from it and made improvements to appeal to voters like me, and instead they threw a fucking hissy fit and continue to throw hissy fits to this day. Like, and you know, not all conservatives, but like many. And so like it's kind of like the same thing. Like this person wrote a book basically saying like, you know, communists should probably acknowledge that things have not always gone well. Their mistakes were made. And you know, I have to respect that as a position.
And then with the second one, you know, with that London conference, I would say Beanie did read the line where she writes, whoever doesn't want to talk about Stalinism has no right to talk about communism, or can't yet talk about communism, something like that. Seems to me that would be what another operation would see. So there you get my my question. I mean, in some ways I would say Beanie's encouraging us to let go of our reflexive anti-communism. You know what I mean? Like, so for instance, Philip was saying earlier that every time we get, I don't know, a virus restriction, people say, oh, that's, you know, like, that's like Stalinism or communism. And so, and it inspires in us, especially us who lived a little bit through the Cold War, a kind of anti-communism, you know, a fuck you, like, what do you say about, but I think that Beanie wants to let that go. And that's what I find very interesting. So one thing I admire most about the book is this ability to lucidly recognize all of the crimes and tragedies and betrayals and still maintain a communist desire and a future of communism. Like that.
So even though, so he's fine. This guy's probably like a lifelong communist, right? And for years, this guy wanted to like just completely ignore the millions and millions and millions of people that communism has like killed. But now, good for him. He's come around to the idea that, you know what, even though communism has never been successful, even though it's killed a lot of people and made a lot of people's lives miserable, we can acknowledge that and still persist in our desire for a communist utopia in the future. Yeah, it's a, you know, you gotta respect the resilience, if nothing else. Mandatory Carry, thank you for the super chat. There's a lot in there. There's a lot in that super chat, and I don't exactly know how to read it, especially not without getting a strike on YouTube. But I'll display it on the screen and say that, and I will say that many people believe many different things, and not everyone agrees with you. And I'm not going to take a position either way because I don't want to get a strike. But thank you for the super chat. I do appreciate it.
That's what I think was not possible at these previous moments. So in 1997, with the Black Book of Communism, it seemed to give anything to the credence of the crimes of communism would mean somehow to make impossible the dream, the continuing desire. And I sort of read that still in the various idea of communism lectures. So anyway, that's, you get my thing. I guess just one last thing about this periodization question or historical question. Like, what are the conditions of possibility? That's really my question. What are the conditions of possibility? So, just one other anecdote about this, Cold War thing. I've been teaching a course on Marxism every spring to undergraduate students for the last 27 or 28 years.
Oh, isn't that nice?
And it's really changed a lot, the students who come to the class, because in 1993, 1994, when I started doing this, 18 and 20-year-olds came to the class thinking they knew what Marxism was because they knew what Soviet doctrine was, or at least what some US view of Soviet doctrine was. And so in order to read Marx, we had to go through all of this unlearning in order to approach the text. It's really fantastic now, for the last, 15 years, that 18, 20-year-olds don't have that overlay and are able to read Marx for what Marx actually says. So I think that's just another indication that perhaps that we need to reflect on, or I need to reflect on. Maybe I should just pose this as a personal thing. Beanie's book makes me reflect on what the current conditions are that allow a different relationship to the different histories of communism that don't themselves threaten, this is what I'm reading in her, a communist future and a communist desire, all these things. Okay, I think you get what I'm getting at with that. I'll be more brief with the last two. The second is another historical one, which is that this book, it goes anti-chronologically, that you probably got already from Beattie's reading, but the latest it goes is really in the 1940s. And so I'm wondering, what if we were to extend this reasoning up to the 1980s and 1990? I mean, what does the logic of Beattie's narrative, what would it say about the collapse of the Soviet Union and its end? And I think this is a little bit what I think. I'm projecting a little bit my own ideas, but I'm sort of thinking, what if there were another chapter in her book that were to go to that part? It seems to me that the argument is really that it's not about external pressures. It's not about, the desire to go get blue jeans in Western Germany, or the desire, or the competition, military competition with Reagan and his Star Wars program set like that. It's rather a completely internal question. In fact, I would say,
oh my
this
God,
is what I'm trying to link up
it's
with.
fucking painful.
Narrative.
Ask your question.
It might be interesting to pose it that the Soviet Union collapsed not for having too much communism, as the anti-communists would say.
Oh, here we go.
But for a lack of communism.
The Soviet Union collapsed not because they had too much communism, but because they had too little communism. It's a theory, I suppose. I don't think it's a correct theory, but that's a theory.
And here's a minor way of saying that, a kind of argument that I've made other times, which is that the Soviet Union succeeded, and this is a super reductive argument, excuse me for it, it succeeded perhaps overly well in a disciplinary modernization. In a disciplinary modernization that coincided with a certain industrial mentality and worker productivity question, but they didn't, they couldn't actually break out of the disciplinary framework. And that while at the same time the Soviet Union created...
John Morgan is probably one of the youngest people watching this right now, and he is wise beyond his years. He says, it's like they're so smart, they've lost all common sense. That is absolutely correct, John. That is absolutely correct. Yep. Kurt says, since the communist utopia is historically inevitable, it cannot be a failure of communism. It must be a lack of... Kurt, that makes so much sense. So in these people's minds, they view... And actually, I had a fucking economics... I took like one economics class in college, like one. And the economics professor I had was ironically, Billy Corgan's uncle, like Billy Corgan of the Smashing Pumpkins. But anyway, what I distinctly remember this 8 a.m. economics class that I was stupid enough to take as a freshman. Like I was sitting at, like, the only thing I remember from that class is Billy Corgan's uncle teaching us that communism was the highest evolved form of society. And so these people think that, like, this is the inevitable evolution of society. And so if there are any failures of it, it must be because they weren't doing it right. That makes a ton of sense when you put it that way.
Created an incredible mass intellectuality, through education programs, through scientific developments, etc. There was a kind of gap between, let's say, the subjective desires and creativity and the disciplinary nature of the. So I would try to fit that into a collapse due to the lack of communism. Of course, that means, and this is something that Beanie seems to set on doing, rewriting what is meant by communism. Of course, when I say lack of communism, I don't mean lack of state control of the economy and social order. I mean something quite different, as she does. Okay, one last thing, which is more of a political question. Yeah. And this might be cheating, because I got the book, I got this idea from Beanie's other book in English, Communism for Kids. And it posed a question for me in this book. And the question was really about what is meant by communism. Because in Communism for Kids, Beanie says several times, it's a kind of refrain that communism is not the solution to all problems. It's only the solution to the problems caused by capitalism. In fact, let me just read. It comes in the very beginning.
Communism, in Communism for Kids, communism is not the solution for all problems. It's only a solution for the problems caused by capitalism. Yes, so for those who joined late, the other person in this literally wrote a book called Communism for Kids.
It's repeated several times. She writes, communism. Oh yeah, she gives this example of an illness and what treats a remedy for that specific illness. Communism is kind of like that. It doesn't heal all suffering, but rather only the suffering caused by capitalism. And then my question was, so I have a question about that, really, or maybe I might even have a disagreement about that. Maybe it's not usually like me, but that's what. But I'm wondering if it's different in the other book. Because this is why, for me, I'm much more comfortable thinking of myself as a communist rather than as a Marxist, because I think communism does have to treat a series of other hierarchies and is not just about anti-capitalism. And I don't mean this just, so I think communism also has to be anti-patriarchal. It also has to be anti-white supremacist. It has to be, and why is that? That's not just because I'd say, well, communism is all good things. It's against all bad things. No, I don't mean that. I would say starting from the, I mean, one, I could mean that too, whatever. But it's a little bit more useful for me to say that the capitalist order, as it is formed historically, is inextricably tied and mutually constituted with the patriarchal order. And it's inextricably tied with and
white supremacy,
and mutually constitutive of the racial hierarchy. And so it makes it's impossible to, or rather politically detrimental to, I would put it that way, conceive of a communist project and a communist desire that only thinks in terms of capitalist order and thinks that these other struggles might be allied but separate. Because one could say,
okay, I want to make a point here. What have I told you guys 19 ways from Sunday? The goals of the woke left are to gain as much power as possible, destabilize the system, attack capitalism, usher in their Marxist utopia. What he's saying right now is that he not only sees communism as the solution to all the problems that capitalism has made, but that the patriarchy and white supremacy are inherent to the problems that capitalism has made. They view these as interchangeable. So anytime you hear white supremacy, anytime you hear patriarchy, anytime you hear these words, they are talking about capitalism. And you always have to keep this in mind. The number one enemy of the woke left is not white people. When they say whiteness, they don't mean skin color. They mean who owns private property. They mean the capitalists. Because their number one enemy is not white people, it is capitalism. He's using these terms interchangeably.
Okay, well, I'm a communist, therefore I'm anti-capitalist. Of course, I'm an ally of the feminists, and I'm an ally of the anti-racist. No, I think that it has to be internal, and that's what communism. And so that is, of course, thinking communism in a way that Marx couldn't. That's fine. The way that Lenin couldn't. Totally fine with that. Maybe Kollontai could think that a little bit, but just a little bit. Anyway.
That's right, Kurt. That's how Kanye West can embody whiteness. Because he's a capitalist. The capitalists are the bourgeoisie. And by the way, guys, if you don't know, in my community, we're actually reading the Communist Manifesto right now. We got a book club coming up in a couple of weeks. If you'd like to join us for that. But Communist Manifesto, if you never read it, is really short. Really, really short. There's a lot in it, but it's really short. So plenty of time.
All of our ancestors isn't the point. So I guess I want to. This seems to me a political question. That, yeah, it doesn't have to be a question for you, Beanie. It could just be a point of discussion in which what the because obviously, okay, let me come back so it doesn't seem too external to our conversation. Even though all that Beanie was reading, and a large portion of this book, is about the crimes and the betrayals and the tragedies, underlying it all has to be and is a future project, a living project now. And so that's what I'm thinking. What is, clarifying this project that is not tarnished or diminished by these past tragedies. It seems to be the one has to, or I feel the need to fill it out a little bit more. Okay, I hope I didn't go on too long. I hope Philip and Beanie, you can see what, at least the kind of things I'm pointing towards. So could start with any of those. Or
no, Anthony, I'm not getting the white part wrong. You are getting the white part wrong because they consider people who are not white. Whiteness has nothing to do with the color of your skin. It has to do with you owning private property, being in charge, being the boss, being the landlord. It is entirely about capitalism. That is why Larry Elder is considered a white supremacist. That is why Kanye West is considered a white supremacist. That's why in January of 2021, the Washington Post ran a headline talking about multiracial whiteness. I am not getting the white part wrong. You are getting the white part wrong. You don't understand what they mean by whiteness. Luckily, I have a 1-minute explainer video on my channel under the woke word section. I'm doing 1-minute shorts to explain what these things mean. If that's not good enough, then you are welcome to come back and come to a happy hour, or come to any of the 2-year, go watch any of the 2 years of content that I've been building in this area that will explain why you are absolutely undeniably wrong. And you need to watch what they're saying and listen to what they're saying and not just behave like an outrage junkie that is desperate for people to be against white people. They are not against white people. They love white people. They love this guy right here that's on the screen. He's pretty fucking white, but they love him because he's a communist. It's not about your skin color. They don't care about your skin color. It is only about capitalism. That is all it is.
or leave them alone.
Well, thanks, Michael. And I think those are very useful points to start discussion. The notion in the beginning, for example, that the attitude that that happened years ago. That wasn't me. The communism I'm thinking about has no relation to that. All of that is true in a certain way, but we have to be attentive to what that statement echoes, a very specific one in American history that you hear a lot, which goes like this. My ancestors came over here in 1903. They came from Eastern Europe. They have nothing to do with slavery or whatever caused the Civil War. I'm not associated with that. And as we've learned to essentially distrust that statement or throw it out as any kind of answer to anything, we have to essentially embrace, in a certain way, what happened there. And the reason we have to do it, to overcome what Beanie calls the loss of that loss. And what she means, the loss of the loss, is that the people who experienced that loss were those communists who fought for 20 years, who died or lined up against walls, and nobody remembers them in history, and they got nothing. So
wait. Is he actually arguing that the great victims of World War II were the communists who fought for years for their glorious revolution and are unremembered in history? Is that the argument that I just heard? I just want to rewind that. I'm pretty sure that's what we just heard. That the real guys, the real victims. Anthony, you are incorrect, and I don't really give a fuck what excuse you make in the chat. I'm not going to keep arguing with you anymore. You are incorrect. You haven't done your homework. I've done 2 years worth of homework in this area every single day of my life. Complaining and whining in my chat is only going to get you blocked, dude. You can keep it up, but you're going to get blocked because you are not correct. And you are welcome to avail yourself of the freely available content that I have on this channel to show you why you're not correct. But if you're going to keep complaining in the chat that I told you that you were incorrect and pointed you to content showing you that you were incorrect, you're going to get blocked at some point, dude. But I'm pretty sure the argument that we just heard from this guy is that the real victims are the ones that were killed in the name of communism. So I just want to rewind and listen to that again. And just so we're clear, guys, I am done pandering and like placating the feelings of conservatives who come in with their outlandish ideas about what this stuff actually means. I have done enough homework to know what this stuff fucking means. And conservatives can have whatever feels about that they want to have, but they are like almost universally wrong in everything that they say because they don't listen. All right, let's listen again.
The notion in the beginning, for example, that the attitude that that happened years ago, that wasn't me. The communism I'm thinking about has no relation to that. All of that is true in a certain way, but we have to be attentive to what that statement echoes, a very specific one in American history that you hear a lot, which goes like this. My ancestors came over here in 1903. They came from Eastern Europe. They have nothing to do with slavery or whatever caused the Civil War. I'm not associated with that. And as we've learned to essentially distrust that statement or throw it out as any kind of answer to anything, we have to essentially embrace, in a certain way, what happened there. And
hang on, he's gonna get to the part that I said in a second, but I want to answer Anthony's question. Anthony, I have a series of 1-minute short videos on this channel that explain exactly what the woke ideology means. Those videos are not based on my personal lived experience. Those videos are based on over 2 years now of research where I watch this stuff all the time. And I listen to how they're using language. And if you want to avail yourself of that research, much of it was done on stream on my second channel, youtube.com/activelyunwoke. You can watch any of our happy hour streams, but you can particularly watch the ones about whiteness, and that's going to explain to you exactly what it is. I also have dozens of videos on this channel about it. But if you want the quick explanation, you can go to the shorts that I have at the very top of my channel, and that will give you a quick overview.
And the reason we have to do it, to overcome what Beanie calls the loss of that loss. What she means, the loss of the loss, is that the people who experienced that loss were those communists who fought for 20 years, who died or lined up against walls, and nobody remembers them in history, and they got nothing. So she joins essentially that powerful piece of writing from 1940, Benjamin's thesis of history, on history, which says at a certain point, it's only by the redemption of the dead, going back into the past, that we can even get to the future. We have to validate their hopes and recognize them, and not just put that away and go and create our own little pure communism somewhere, which we don't even call communism, which we call post-capitalism or anti-capitalism.
Oh, that's actually a really important piece of information, and I want to come back to that. No, Anthony, you're not getting CRT mixed up with this. This is CRT. This is CRT. The two are one and the same. All of this comes from the same place, so you're not getting anything mixed up. It all comes from the same place. If you think that CRT hates white people, you are wrong. CRT hates capitalism. And again, I've done hundreds of fucking videos about this. Hundreds at this point. So you're welcome to avail yourself of those. But I just want to talk, like, I want to show you guys what I pick. And by the way, guys, if you are confused about why I'm getting into an argument with Anthony in the chat about what this language actually means, it's because I listen very closely to how they're using the language in the context of their own presentations. That is where I come up with my definitions. And when I hear a pattern over and over and over and over and over again in almost every single presentation that we watch that's presented by these people. And I will say that at this point, I really do believe that I've watched more of their actual training and presentations than anyone else on the planet. I'm absolutely in the top 5. And when you hear these patterns emerge over and over and over again, you start to understand exactly and precisely how they are manipulating the language. So what he just did that was very interesting, that we all need to keep in mind, and I'm going to give you a real world example of this, is he said that when we get to our communist utopia, that we aren't even calling it communism. And you can see on the screen, we're calling it post-capitalism or anti-capitalism. Now, why I say that's interesting is there is a teacher trainer in Cambridge, Massachusetts, that was just paid $32,000 by the school district in Cambridge, Massachusetts, not that long ago, actually, about a month ago, to do teacher training in Cambridge, Massachusetts. And I exposed this woman because she's all over the internet talking about how she wants to abolish capitalism. She's an anti-capitalist. And so I exposed that the Cambridge, Massachusetts school district is, in a very capitalistic fashion, paying this woman $32,000 for 1 day of training. And she's all over the place saying she's an anti-capitalist. And now, where do we see that language showing up? This guy is saying, we're not calling it communism. We're calling it post-capitalism or anti-capitalism. This is why this is an excellent, excellent, excellent example of why we have to listen to what these people are saying, no matter how painful it is, no matter how much it sucks, no matter how boring it can be. And it can be really boring sometimes. We have to listen to what they're saying because they will tell us how they're manipulating the language. He just told us how he's manipulating the language. They're not calling it communism anymore because they know that communism has a bad reputation. They're calling it post-capitalism or anti-capitalism. That doesn't mean it's not communism. So when we listen to their content and we hear them talk to each other about how they're manipulating the language, then we can learn how they're playing games, and we can learn how to identify it when it shows up in the real world. Because they don't always lay it out as clearly as this guy just did. It might be something where someone says, oh, anti-capitalism, capitalism abolitionist, or something like that, and they drop it in the middle of a sentence where there's a whole bunch of critical race theory all around that, and then they just throw in and abolish capitalism. And it's like it's over in an instant, and you don't even notice it unless you've listened to people like this talk about how they are post-capitalist and anti-capitalist. This is how we know how they're manipulating the language. This is probably one of the most important things that we can understand, is how they are manipulating the language, because the language is the greatest weapon they are using. I just want to rewind it, just like let you listen to this part again, because this is important. And you have to a certain extent, guys, you have to, in order to really get the most benefit out of this. And I don't know why you guys are watching Socialism Saturday right now. Like, put it in the chat why you're watching Socialism Saturday. I do these because I want to reverse engineer what these people are doing so that we can come up with ways to defeat them. And in order to do that, we need to understand them, and we need to understand their mindset, and we need to understand their tactics and their strategies and what they're trying to achieve. And so, well, this is fun. And yes, I'm drinking a blue beer that tastes like a pina colada, and we're having a good time with it, and we're bantering and all of this stuff. I do actually have a serious purpose in terms of doing this. And so, yeah, I mean, some of you are saying that, you know, John Morgan's saying he wants to learn. James Jones says because you have to know your enemy. Kurt is watching out of simple curiosity of what they're saying. These are all perfectly fine reasons. To stare down pure evil, I love that. I'm watching to figure out what BS they are using to hoodwink the average Americans. I like hanging out with the cult. Bot just wants to hang out and like troll on Twitter. I might bring kids into the world. I think that's, yeah. I mean, I think, well, yes, Anthony, CRT does say very racist things, but if you think that that's all that CRT is, you're missing the point. You're missing the point, which is what I'm trying to tell you. Reagan says, I want to be aware of their tactics and learn too. Stevie says, I like to see how toothless the opposition is. I mean, they're not toothless though, Stevie. This is what we've been talking about for the last several weeks on Socialism Saturday. These people are winning. They are winning. They are winning. They are driving the talking points of the people controlling the institutions. They are winning. If you underestimate or dismiss these people, keep in mind you are underestimating or dismissing someone that is kicking the ever-loving shit out of you right now. They're winning. Not by a little bit. By a lot. By a significant degree. Best way I find is to just call them out as commies. I mean, okay, I don't know that that actually works because they're on these people are not shy about being communists. They're on the internet saying they're communists. They are not shy about being communists. If you call them a communist, they're going to be like, yep. So I don't think that that's the best tactic in the world because, you know, not going to lie, it's funny to watch. It is funny to watch, Gremlin. It is. It is. I get it. Kazmar, watching to learn and see how the language is introduced in schools. Carol, I wanted to get a greater understanding of what communism and socialism is so I can recognize it. I love these streams. Carol, that's exactly what we're trying to do here. Boom her, I am learning how to discuss this and combat the points. Exactly. So lots of good reasons to watch Socialism Saturday. Let's listen to this again.
Overcome what Beanie calls the loss of that loss. And what she means, the loss of the loss, is that the people who experienced that loss were those communists who fought for 20 years, who died or lined up against walls.
It's the poor
and nobody
communists.
remembers them in history, and they got
I
nothing.
know.
So
I know. The poor communists are the real
She joins
victim.
essentially that powerful piece of writing from 1940, Benjamin's thesis of history on history, which says at a certain point, it's only by the redemption of the dead, going back into the past, that we can even get to the future. We have to validate their hopes and recognize them, and not just put that away and go and create our own little pure communism somewhere, you know, which we don't even call communism, which we call post-capitalism or anti-capitalism, because they're a little antsy about being associated with Stalin or so forth. One has to embrace it head on.
There it
because
is.
I think at some other point, Beanie says in the book, you know, the head of Stalin is welded to the forehead of Karl Marx, whether we like it or not. It's just there. And it's very easy, as Badiou said, and essential, by the way, to say to anyone what particular paragraphs, what line in Capital leads to the gulag or the purge. They never concite it because, of course, it doesn't. And that's true, but it's somehow beside the point. So there has to be a way of going through that past and coming out the other side in a way that I think Benjamin thought and Beanie advocates here. This was not a book that I saw a need for in the beginning. My first reaction, as I said, was something like, oh, God, the Moscow Towers, we're going back here at this moment. Why? Why do we need this? Kind of unconsciously embracing the idea of, focusing on capitalism itself, and then leaving the creation of the future up to the creativity of the people in the future who, having been endowed with free choice, which they don't have now, will create a society.
People don't have free choice? So what he believes is people don't have free choice under capitalism. And when we get into the, oh, look, my tongue's blue. So they believe that people don't have free choice under capitalism, but when we get into the post-capitalist future, that's when people will have free choice and will be able to create whatever experience they want. Yeah, that definitely seems plausible.
Whatever needs to be done, but at least there'll be something that will not be a reified society that will reproduce itself.
Reified, we learned that last week.
Beings in the future, and I leave it to them. But at the moment, let's look at what capitalism is doing. And of course, the book gradually dissolves that attitude as you go for it, and you realize in your historical fraternity with all these people who have died and shared that dream, is that you have to rescue their dream, find out what it was, and don't dismiss them from the narrative that you're developing now. There's a wonderful, I could read so many. I had originally planned to just read parts of this because there are so many wonderful passages in it, like this one. The future today cannot simply be located in the moments of the present that point beyond it. There is no latent communism, no new society slumbering within the old, but instead, this future must first be dislodged from the moments in the past in which they are anchored. Lines broken off. In the gaps between the compulsory historical contexts exist vanishing points whose vectors point in other directions. So, I mean, this is quite within the Benjaminian tradition of the tiger's leap in the past, finding those sort of possible futures or vectors that were never developed. What I learned today, listening to Beanie read, was that the book was written in 2007. I didn't look at the beginning. I just assumed it was written after Communism for Kids came out this year, and it seemed to me totally timely and apt. But putting it at 2007 lends it even more resonance. The other day when we were doing new Marxist approaches to literature and art, a lot of people gave sort of short autobiographical biographies of the stages on their return to Marx, from being lost in the 80s in the midst of theory and maybe some mild ideology critique, to going to the point where suddenly they were starting to call themselves communist, and the roads on the way turned out to be the WTO 1999 demonstrations, which got everybody to the stage of what you might call anti-corporatism. But again, moving beyond the corporate, whatever.
Hang on.
Then
Gremlin's asking a great question in the chat. What is it with communists targeting the arts? I have a very distinct opinion on this. If anyone else has a very distinct opinion on it, please feel free to chat in your answers. But I think that communists target the arts because the arts are what drive culture. Art drives culture. Culture drives politics. If you want to create a communist society, then you have to start by changing the culture, which is the cultural revolution that we are all in today. And eventually, when you do that for a good long time, the culture will influence politics. Politics is downstream of culture. The politics of the moment, the issues that people care about, they are reflective of the culture that has been creative. So if communists are targeting the arts, it's because they want to influence culture. And they will target anything, and that's in a good way. But if you're talking about them targeting the arts to get rid of art, they're going to target art that doesn't support the culture that they want. So, art, music, painting, drawing, movies, TV shows, plays, all of that's going to influence culture.
Invasion of Iraq, which made people anti-imperialists again, but we're still not talking communism. There are a lot of, then finally, in 2008, there's the financial crisis, and a lot of people said, and I took a course with David Harvey, or I watched the videos, and they get into the political economy of capitalism, and suddenly they find themselves on the other side, taking Marx serious as analysts and embracing the whole communist tradition. So the book comes out, Beanie's book comes out before that happens. It comes out a year before the financial crisis. People haven't made the pilgrimage back. They're still clothing the resistance in euphemisms like post-capitalism or whatever they might call it, and people are less inclined to do it now. So as people have made that leap over that first moment of referring to themselves, of embracing this tradition, it becomes even more imperative to go back and go through this past and find the slivers of hope and possibly other directions that can be taken. I have more to say about some of Michael's other points, but I'll stop at this point just because we should have some discussion.
I'm not sure how we're doing it now, because we also agreed that we want the audience to be able to participate, but I would also love to say something.
I think what we'll do is we'll have a bit of a discussion among ourselves and then invite.
Okay. Okay, great. So, of course, like Communism for Kids was published in US only in 2017, right? I think, which was almost 10 years after economical crisis, and is after the Occupy Wall Street protests. And an effect of these protests was, of course, as you just mentioned, Philip, that the term like socialism became interesting again for a broader population, that you have these surveys that say in the US more people or younger people are in favor of socialism than ever in the history of the United States. Of course, this is caused by the economical crisis and then the protest. And this was, of course, the moment when a big publishing house like MIT gets also interested in books on socialism and communism for a broader public. But then, of course, the publication of this book was met by this outburst by conservatives and anti-communists in the US, and none of them ever read the book.
We're listening to you right now, honey.
We will not read the book, but still writing a review, and of course, all mentioning the horror of Stalinism, the gulags, and so on, and propagating that I would propagate these horrible Stalinist crimes. And it was, of course, interesting for me to read all these comments, since I had already 10 years before that written the book Yesterday's Tomorrow, and could honestly say that I worked through the horrors of Stalinism much more sincerely than any of these anti-communists had done. I'd love to talk to all of your 3 points, Michael, but let me start maybe with one. My book, like the Communism for Kids, I wrote this book for a conference that comrades of mine, organized in Frankfurt, 2003, was called Indeterminate Communisms. I think both of you were not there, but like many international theorists were there. This Slavoj Žižek that you mentioned before was there. For example, this was 6 years before the conference, the idea of communism in London, which later then also came to Berlin. Was organized by Melanie Schreiber, Sabine Flick, Daniel Loic, and so on. And their idea was that now, this was 10 years, more than 10 years after the fall of the wall, we could come back to the term of communism, like reclaim this term, because it had been somehow liberated from this dust, from the...
They're reclaiming the term communism like the gays reclaimed the word queer. It's not a coincidence that this person also was involved in queer studies, which, if you didn't hear that, they did say that at the beginning, that this person is also like involved in queer studies. And by the way, I do have to give this person credit for at least acknowledging the horrors of communism. You do have to give her points for that, I suppose. But this is also like a queer studies professor. So is it any coincidence that the LGBTQIA++ LMNOP activists reclaimed the word queer in the same way that she's describing the communists are reclaiming the word communist?
This authoritarian grasp, right? And that we could bring back the term communism in the discussion. And for them, it was important because it was an answer to the neoliberal fragmentation of the left. You had lefties working on anti-fascism, some working feminism, anti-racism, but each of them working in their little field and having really difficulties of coming together. Of course, there were some theorists bringing into discussion like ideas of how to do that, you know, the multitude as a term. But at the same time, nobody at this conference was really interested in talking about the history. In fact, they felt like we have finally been liberated from this history. Now we can talk about communism without talking about the history.
Holy shit. Okay. So the premise is that if we acknowledge the horrors of communism, that it will liberate communism from those horrors, so that we can then move on and have a rational conversation about how to do communism correctly.
And I wrote the Communism for Kids, but already in the epilogue, I reflected upon that and said, can we talk about communism after Stalinism without talking about communism? And this is why then I wrote Yesterday's Tomorrow 3 years later, and I went into that. But it was also inspired by this conference, because on this conference there was Katja Diefenbach speaking, a philosopher, Marxist philosopher from Berlin, and in her talk she started mentioning a lot of names, and somebody from the audience shouted, you know, give us more name dropping. And she said, okay, you want more name dropping? I give you more name dropping. And then she mentioned all these names. She said Manish Berber, Susanne Leonard, Franz Jung, and so on and so on. She went on, because those names were not just name dropping. It was not showing off her knowledge. But these names were the names of communists, libertarian communists who were
libertarian communists. Kurt
forgotten.
Kurt said this earlier. This is like Kurt, you called it. Kurt, I owe you a beer. I know you didn't ask for a beer when you called it, but I owe you a beer. Kurt said earlier in the discussion that these people are the intersection of libertarians and communists. She just called them libertarian communists. Kurt for the win. Legend.
only by the mainstream history, but also by communists themselves. So it was
I'll get you a
important to
cider,
bring
Kurt.
in
I'll get
these
you a cider.
marginalized voices, these marginalized names, these minoritarian revolutionaries back in.
Man. Tom J, can we acknowledge the wrongs of slavery and then talk about how to do slavery correctly? Well done, Tom J. Great super chat. Blair will never have me on her channel because I called Blair out for blatantly supporting a school that was covering up that teachers were molesting students, because she does. She does. Blair White is totally in the Mike Harlow, Baron Munchausen camp, who are, and this is a camp of people that are completely okay with a school covering up for teachers molesting students, because that school gave me a no trespass order when I went with a group of people to a school board meeting to protest the school covering up for teachers molesting students. So Blair White is, I'm sorry to say, is just a grifter fucking shill that doesn't actually believe any of the things that she says. And you know what? I always had like a positive, I won't say positive. I had a cordial relationship with Blair White. I've done events with her on multiple occasions. Blair White is someone that likes nice clothes and likes to look pretty, but doesn't really believe the things that they say because they don't act on the things that they say. All they want is to be famous and to make money, so they continue to buy the pretty clothes, so they continue to have the nice dresses. That's what she wants. So no, I will do nothing with Blair White ever, 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 ever again. Because Blair White is a grifter shill that doesn't believe the things that she claims to believe and will do nothing when schools are covering up for teachers who are molesting students except attack the people who are protesting the schools that are doing those things. Blair never got hate from me. I never said anything negative about Blair publicly. She came after me because of Walkaway's fame whore Mike Harlow. Because all they care, they're grifters, man. They're grifters. Pure, 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 pure grifters. And it was disappointing to me when I figured this out. It was disappointing to me too. Anyway.
Into the discussion. And of course, I think I agree completely with what you're saying, Michael, that it was possible.
I've got no
to write
time for
this
these
book,
fucking grifters,
I would
man. We
say,
got actually
after
important shit to do.
in a way that would not have been possible before that, right? And of course, there are many people who write these kind of books, and these are just the books that I'm also trying to bring back into the memory and are in the back of my book, you know. Let's say, for example, Susanne Leonard, who writes this amazing book, The Stolen Life, where she writes exactly about this, about her biography, where she goes to the Soviet Union and is, as an anti-fascist, as a communist, as a socialist, and is imprisoned and brought to the Gulag. And she publishes this book in the 1950s, and in the foreword, she reflects upon the question whether she shall publish this book or not, whether the publication of this book will harm the socialist international movement or not. And in the end, she decides to publish it because she says, no, not publishing that, remaining silent about Stalinism, not criticizing this Stalinism. This will actually harm socialism because it will feed into the lie that Stalinism is in fact socialism. And this, I think, is exactly the moment where anti-communism
Stalinism
and Stalinism
isn't socialism?
come together, you know. They are complicit in this because they both agree that there is an identity of Stalinism and socialism. They just have different opinions on it. For the anti-communists, this socialism is negative. For the Stalinists, is positive. But both are very eager to make unthinkable, to make unrememberable all those communists and communist movements and fractions that were in fact anti-Stalinist, libertarian. And one of the goals of Yesterday's Tomorrow is just in fact to bring back these voices, bring back these minoritarian, libertarian, anti-authoritarian communists in the discussion and open up history from this perspective. And of course, it was easier after 1990. But as I said already, I think in 1998, when the Black Book of Communism was published.
I mean, I'm going to be honest. Like, if these people wanted to voluntarily go and create their own little communist utopia where they weren't forcing anyone to be there and anyone could leave if they wanted and go somewhere else and do something else, I actually would consider that to be like libertarian communism, right? If you can voluntarily get a group of people to say, yes, I want to go into a state like Vermont, and we are going to make Vermont our own little communist utopia, and we're not going to force anyone to be a part of it that doesn't want to be a part of it, and we're not going to, people can come and go, and everyone that is involved in our little communist community like wants to be here, and no one's putting anyone in prison to keep it. Like, if it is a 100% voluntary commitment, I would actually have no issue with it. I don't really care. And if that's what that person wants to do, as long as they're not trying to force me to be involved in it, they can go to town. If that's what they mean by like libertarian communism, fine, whatever. Take over Vermont, I don't really care. Take over California for all I care. I don't care. As long as you're not forcing anyone to be there, fine. Yeah, well, this is a good point. They did well, no, because Cuba wasn't voluntary. No, the Cuba wasn't voluntary. I'm talking about a 100% voluntary society. I'm not talking about like, it's kind of like what we're trying to do in New Hampshire with the libertarians, right? We're trying to get as many libertarians as possible to move to New Hampshire. We're also trying to make New Hampshire, and I think we need to do more of this, but, it's working pretty well so far. We're also trying to make New Hampshire extremely uncomfortable for progressives so they fucking leave. That's like that is a voluntary society. We're trying to get people to voluntarily come here. We're trying to get people to voluntarily leave and go somewhere else. If the communists did that, if they wanted to create their own communist state project, again, in Vermont or Oregon or California, and they just wanted to get people to voluntarily move to those states who wanted to be like part of it, fine. And they're trying to get like people that don't want to be a part of it to leave, fine. I can't argue with that. But oftentimes it's not what they're talking about. Am I a free stater? Well, here's the thing. I don't consider myself to be a free stater purely because I moved here when I was still a Democrat, and I moved here for a job, and I didn't get involved with the Free State Project people until like a year and a half ago. Now, I'm very friendly with the Free Staters. I like the Free Staters. I want to work with the Free Staters, but I don't consider myself a Free Stater because I did not move here to the Free State for the Free State Project, and I'm not a signer on the Free State Project. However, there are Free Staters that like it when people who are already in New Hampshire kind of work with them, and sometimes they call us Free Staters. But for me, like people like Kurt who moved to New Hampshire specifically for the Free State Project, they have cred in my book. That is a big effing commitment. And so I don't call myself a Free Stater because I didn't move here for this. I didn't pick up my life to come here for this. And I think that the people who did deserve some credit, and they deserve that clout that I didn't come here for. But I do work closely with the Free Staters. I'm very friendly with the Free Staters. I love the Free State Project. I think that the Free State Project is really the only hope that we have. I am free, exactly, Sin. I am Free State adjacent. I'm Free State Project adjacent.
There were also some communists who said, Zvi Schritt-Kopcha, for example, he said, we should, as communists, not fight against the book, but take it as a beginning and go beyond that and present a more vivid analysis, a more radical, more fundamental, and Marxist analysis of Stalinism than this book is capable of. But even though in part of we can use it. And yeah, but it was, Yesterday's Tomorrow was written in 2007, so this is before the idea of communism. And just one last thing, that my friend Daniel Loic, the philosopher who also part in organizing the Indeterminate Communismus conference, he was in the US at the time very often, and he said, Bini, we have to publish Yesterday's Tomorrow in English, because it's just a perspective that is missing in the discussion.
It's not a bad take. It's exactly what the Free State Project is doing in New Hampshire right now. So I disagree. If they can get a critical mass of people to move to a state to give them political power, then they get to run that state. I'm sorry. And if you don't like it, you can get a critical mass of people to oppose them, or you can leave and go somewhere that's more aligned with your values. So yes, if the communists want to organize and to take over a state like Vermont and to get communists to move to Vermont so they can create their communist utopia, that's the way this stuff works, man. I can't knock them for it. The Free State Project is doing exactly the same thing in New Hampshire. If you don't like it, leave and move and go somewhere else. But it's not like they're forcing you to stay. They're not forcing you to stay. That's really the point. You are not forced to be a part of it. You can choose to move.
Where you often find yourself in you either like anti-Stalinist and then anti-communist, like anarchist, or you're somehow in the Leninist faction, which is basically this idea of communist.
Can I reframe just a little? I mean, in essence, the only way, by not remembering Stalinism, you have to forget all of these comrades who died under it. They have to be banished from history, and that's what our obligation is. And the notion also of them being libertarian communists, I think, and the other thing you said, by the way, very well, is that the liberal anti-communists don't remember these people. They're just numbers and names that are swelling the list. So since they're not going to be remembered by the liberals, they have to be remembered by us. But it's not their libertarian dimension, again, which is something liberals can embrace behind. It's the total upside down and topsy-turviness of how one ever gets to a point where one thinks that it's okay to take these people who have been loyal communists and put them in camps, or that if you've got factories that resemble army barracks and are run by Taylorism and involve people working even harder than they do in capitalism, working on weekends, forbidden to strike, that somehow is the dream that people in capitalist society develop to get out of capitalism. Those fundamental things, which are raised by how it's going, one has.
So you don't agree that people should be able to move? You don't agree that people should be able to form voluntary societies? It's not an invasion for people to move, dude. It's not an invasion for people to be able to move from a coordinated effort. That's just like completely incorrect. What you are asserting is that people are not allowed to move. People are not allowed to organize. People are not allowed to form voluntary agreements unless you approve of them. In this case, you are the authoritarian because you are demanding that everyone do what you want in the way that you approve of. People are allowed to move. People are allowed to form voluntary societies. People are allowed to enter into voluntary agreements. You don't get to dictate to them what they do. If you don't like it, recruit more people who agree with you. Or go form your own voluntary society. You have many options on the table. But no, it's not an invasion just because people don't do what you want them to do. You are the authoritarian in this example, dude.
To get beyond that, it's true, one has to also frame the historical circumstances in ways that liberals don't even do it, not as exculpatory matters, but just simply because we have to get down to the details of what's going on. That, for example, Russia, in Lars Lee's book, says that no regime, whether it's the Tsarist regime or the February regime or so on, ever succeeded after World War I started in getting bread to the population. It was just something that was impossible. It's not a particularly Bolshevik failure. You know, all of these details of history that are absent have to be there, not as an exculpatory pattern, but as part of our attempt to try to understand how we got to this place and how we can never get to it again.
I'm wondering that if Beanie if you can hold on, because it sounded like you had some other things to say, but maybe hold on to them, because then we can join in some other people in the conversation, and then I hope we'll circle back too with things, because Stephen, who's here, had a question. I figure you should, why don't you go, Stephen, and then there are other questions in the chat too, which I'll try to curate and bring in as we can, but Stephen's right here. So why don't you go, Stephen?
Hi, Beanie, and everyone. Your book is just amazing. I mean, I really was taken to another planet, and I'm already in another galaxy to begin with. But you really did it. It was great. It is great. One of the things I wanted to ask you about, there's so many things, but one of them is about your discussion of counter revolution, and just backing up a bit, in the argument that the conditions as described by Trotsky and Lenin were right before the revolution in October of 1917, was that for several months, if not a year, Russia was headed into famine, and there was going to be millions of people that were going to die. And so part of the argument that Trotsky put forward was...
All right, I'm going to address you one more time, and then we're going to move on. And if you keep whining and complaining in my chat, I'm just going to block you so I don't have to hear about it anymore. But Neglectful Sausage says, let's say the CCP moves 20 million Chinese nationals into your state and they vote communism. Totally cool, right? No, because what you are ignoring in what I have been repeating to you repeatedly over and over and over again is voluntarism. You can't just willfully ignore parts of the argument, pretend those parts of the argument were made, and then create your own little counter argument based on something that wasn't made in the first place. You are ignoring voluntarism. You are demanding that people adhere to how you want to live and how you see the world. That's authoritarian. You are the authoritarian in this question because you are demanding to control other people. This is not an accurate reflection of what I stated to you. If you would like to have an actual conversation, then what you need to do is understand the argument being made. But as of right now, you're not doing that. You are saying that you want people to bend the knee to what you in particular want. That's not how life works, man. Hate to break it to you. That is not how life works. Well, you don't have your own community if record numbers of people are moving there and outnumbering you. And yes, if you don't like the community that's forming around you, then you have the option to move. If people are voluntarily moving to your state, voluntarily organizing, doing the actual work of creating a society for themselves, and it doesn't align with your values, then you have one of two options. You can recruit people to the state, or you can leave. Or I suppose a third option, which is what you're doing right now, which is you can continue to whine and complain about the reality that you find yourself in, but that's not actually going to change the reality that you find yourself in. So if a whole bunch of people organize among themselves to move to a certain place and to take over political control in that place so they can create the society they want, and you're not included in that, the option that you have is to recruit more people or GTFO or stay and whine. But that's going to be the end of this discussion in the chat. Okay, so we're still whining. So now you're going to get put in a timeout, and the next time you continue to whine in my chat, you're going to get blocked. That's how we're going to handle that.
That there was
God.
needed to be, we needed to have an economy where people were forced to labor in the manner in which people are forced, conscripted and forced to work in the military. So if we left Tsarism where it was going to be a catastrophe. With the revolution succeeding, then there was a counter-revolution, and with the imperialists fighting and attacking under the conditions where there's famine on the horizon. But then you talk about, well, we have to be prepared for not only that counter-revolution, but for the counter-revolution, which is kind of what led into Stalinism, I gather. And I'd like you to talk about how you think we could even succeed going forward. I don't know if succeed is the right word, but how we could even move forward, given that we're confronted with these enormous obstacles that you outline in your book.
Yes, what is the communist utopia of the future?
Yes, thank you for that question. I mean, I continued the work on this part of the history later on in other books, and in those I worked more extensively with the.
I just want to say that Beanie actually seems like a really nice person. I don't think Beanie's a bad person. I don't think Beanie is a malicious person. I think Beanie seems actually like a nice person. That might be controversial. They're a communist. They wrote a book called Communist for Kids. I think they seem like a nice person. I do.
The concept borrowed from Enzo Traverso, who distinguishes between two binaries or two dichotomies. On the one hand, you have like victory and defeat, and on the other, you have success and failure. And I call this the revolutionary dilemmata, because very often, like those pairs are linked to in an anti-parallel manner. And the starting point for the Bolsheviks is like, I would say, three major historical events. It's like the Paris Commune, the defeat of the Paris Commune, the bloodbath, done by the counter-revolution, by the bourgeois counter-revolution. Then it's the Russian Revolution 1905, which is a very similar experience, of a military defeat. And then it's 1914, the betrayal of the social democracy, betrayal of the international solidarity by the social democratic movement. And these three events heighten this authoritarian idea in the Bolsheviks that you must not leave the party politics too open to democratic currents and so on, because you could always have like reformists, you could have like party factions that go in the wrong direction. But for them, it's also very clear, never again shall we experience this kind of defeat. And this is why we have to calculate with counter-revolution, and we have to prepare ourselves for counter-revolution. We will not be defeated by counter-revolution. And in order to succeed against counter-revolution, we have to become more effective, more militarized, more centralized. And the effect is that indeed they win. They are not defeated, but at the same time, they become so militarized, so centralized, that in a way they lose what they have fought for. So they are victorious, but they fail measured against their own ideals. And this, of course, is the dilemmata, because you can see other political ears, other political socialist groups who were very anti-authoritarian, but then not victorious, but were defeated. So the question is, And I mean, I posed this question only in Yesterday's Tomorrow. Try to answer it in later books. Is like, how can we maneuver through this dilemma?
Well, it's interesting that you end your book with Salvador Allende, who would be an example of the defeat without the failure. So I'll just stop there for a moment in the interest of having more discussion, because obviously I have more to say about this. But no, there is one interesting point you make very well, where you said that people can't project themselves outside of history to see the results and predict them with in a certain way. And you do this after listing all the things that are obvious to us as we look back, but that could not have been to anybody in the middle of this. And one thing one can say about Allende is he tried to project himself outside of history, and what he saw would happen if you went outside the system was the Spanish Civil War. He saw essentially 3 years of bloody conflict, and he didn't want that to happen, so he essentially didn't organize. Now, but of course, his particular projection outside of history was entirely hypothetical. You know, it just as easily could have been, had some kind of resistance been mounted, the first coup against Chavez, which was successful for about an afternoon, with the same personnel behind it, a kind of fake democracy movement aligned with some people in the military, but that was overthrown later by the kind of stiff resistance approach, Chavez elements in the, ignoring for a second what happened after that for the next 10 or 12 years. So I'm just saying that, you know, as you rightly say when you discuss it, these are questions of art, feeling for the current moment. They're not things of a science, particularly one that looks outside of history and looks back and said, this is objectively what should be done at this moment, you know. And I guess the argument that this raises is that's why you need a very, very good party that is thinking very well, as opposed to just imposing unthought on a lot of people and measuring loyalty.
Imposing
So when we say
unthought?
the failure of the party,
Wait,
it's
what?
not just a libertarian failure as the way it's presented. The party has ceased to be an effective instrument to really measure reality and think about it.
Wait.
You know, and I know people would say, oh, look, Stalin defeated Hitler and so forth. But anybody who knows the story of the first 10 days of Stalin drunk and having killed all the, in 1937, General Tukhachevsky and people in the purge are liable to ascribe the victory to the courage of the Russian people or something nebulous like that, rather than, you know, but we need a party that thinks and thinks well. And one has to have a variety of ideas within it for that to happen.
I think it might be that Bruno next has a point, and then I do have some saved up that are from the chat that eventually we can get to.
Thanks. Yeah. So thanks for this reading, Beanie, which unfortunately before this morning,
I'm so
I didn't know
confused
your
right
books.
now.
This is amazing.
I'm
My
so
question is
confused at what
about,
we're hearing right now.
This militarized authoritarian Bolshevik victors that you mentioned, you know, the failure in their victory. So I wonder how can we account for that without absolutizing it, you know, without making it into how it's always accounted for, that the Bolsheviks won because the communist idea will somehow necessarily always turn totalitarian. Like, how do you counter that in your work?
Well, first of all, like in Yesterday's Tomorrow, as Michael mentioned already, I'm working backwards. You know, this book starts in 1939, and then goes backwards to 1917. And as Philip said, is an ideas and methodology that I took from Walter Benjamin. And with using this methodology, I can say that Marx, who claimed to be not a Marxist, was less influential to Stalin than Stalin was influential to Marx. Marx influenced our notion, our idea of Marx, stronger than Marx influenced Stalin. So the history is at no point like determined, but there is always a moment of contingency in it. But we have to look like much closer to identify these moments and to ask the question: where did it go wrong? How could it have how could have gone in a different direction, and which political decisions would have needed to be made? You know? And if you dive into the history of 1921, 1920, 1919, 18, and 17, you can identify these moments and always ask: is this politics, is this authoritarian move necessary to defeat counter-revolution, or is it more? Or even if it is, it maybe doing the opposite of what it claims to do. You know, maybe this authoritarian politics also produces, in a way, a counter-revolutionary movement. No, of course, not from the side of the monarchists and the bourgeoisie and the imperialists, but of former allies like social democrats.
Former allies like social democrats.
But
former
allies.
One of
the reasons why I think that the year 1921 is so very crucial for the understanding.
All right, neglectful sausage. Thank you for the money. I appreciate it. So CCP moves 10. Okay, well, I mean, you can pay me money to argue with me, but that's not going to actually make you any less of an authoritarian. Yes, if people voluntarily move to an area and those people I mean, this is actually funny. You just paid me $30 to argue with me. Okay, I will tell you you're an authoritarian again. If you want to control where people move, you are an authoritarian. If you want to control that people can voluntarily organize, then you are the authoritarian. If you don't like what they're doing, then recruit more people to your team. Or keep whining about it. Or keep paying me money, dude. If you want to pay me money to argue with me, I will take your money all night long. Total lack of moral and ethical consistency because you deny the very argument you make. No, I didn't. I didn't deny shit. I don't think you're smart enough to understand the argument that I'm making, which is why you're acting like an SJW whiner in my chat, but you're paying me to do it, so I'll take your money. And then kick me out after professing your love for voluntarism. Well, you are here by my consent. You are in my chat on my channel by my consent. I don't have to allow you to be here. I am voluntarily allowing you to be here right now, but if you continue to annoy me, then I will boot your ass right out because I no longer wish to associate with you. Voluntary association is a thing. I can choose to associate with you, or I can choose to say, you're not my cup of tea, and remove you from my house entirely. We're not in a public place right now. You are on my channel, in my chat, on a platform that I built. You are here by my consent. I can withdraw that consent at any time, and you can go whine about it somewhere else. Borders and refusing to allow people in are good. Check yourself. Okay, go fuck yourself. If you want to keep paying me more money to continue to argue with me, you are welcome to pay me more money. Otherwise, if you keep whining in my chat, I will block your ass and you can go somewhere else. Thank you for the money.
Of the Russian Revolution, or why I would say this is actually the year when the revolution ends, is that it is at the same time the moment when the Bolsheviks or the socialists win over counter-revolution, And so, like the communists like Victor Serge expect that now the dictatorship would loosen up and council democracy would be reintroduced. When in fact 1921 is also the year where the Kronstadt rebellion is crushed, the last anarchist allies are killed or imprisoned, and even in the Bolshevik party, Lenin decides we have enough now of an internal opposition. We want to get rid of the internal opposition altogether, which is like the workers' opposition, for example, led by Alexandra Kalanta. So you see, 1921 is at the same time the year of victory and failure. And this proves that they are
1921
not
is the year of victory and failure.
Necessarily, but there is a gap, and it's a gap we can use.
Exactly.
I wanted to I go to the, there's several questions on the chat, and there are two I wanted to link together.
Hang on, we got a super chat from King Peter of the chat, who will never use super chats to argue with me unless he feels very passionately about it, I'm sure. Peter says the United States federalist system is the best in the world for voluntarism. It does rely on the acceptance of that, and if there's too much power at the federal level, it breaks down to tyranny of the majority, which I agree with, Peter. I don't disagree with anything in your super chat at all. Peter does have an awesome profile photo. That's one of the reasons. Well, Peter is king of the chat for other reasons, but he is perpetual king of the chat. And I want to touch on this too. Carlin has responsibilities as a host, not just to the streaming service, but to those of us in her audience. I have been told on many occasions that the fact that I curate whiners right the fuck out of my chat makes it nicer for everyone else. Makes it nicer for me as a host. And it makes it nicer for everyone. Like, there are two rules in the chat. Don't be a dick and no whining. If you can't follow those rules, go somewhere else.
Which maybe aren't questions for Beanie if you don't feel, because they're both questions about China and Maoism, and I would even put them slightly more general, because your thinking here, Beanie, is very Soviet centric,
and it's going to be slightly
and so some of these questions are, one could do a similar question about the history of the Cuban Revolution, so these two questions are about China and Maoism. So one is, here it goes, from someone starting with knowing next to nothing about the history of Maoism in relation to China's state and economy. I'm wondering about what folks think about the lesson of this remembering and the history/future-oriented project in the current moment of what seems like an increased interest in a Cold War with China. Another question, also about China, and that's why I wanted to put them together. I hope I'm not distorting the two of them. This is William McKeithen. I'm thinking about Michael's question about the historical conditions at the end of the post-Cold War era. As far as formal institutions, so this is the part about how in universities the question about area studies actually enters into this. So here's the question then after this. Knowing, okay. This is, again, sorry, I'm actually repeating it.
My beer is slightly blue.
The question here then is about what, let me repeat his question, and then I could just, maybe anyway, I shouldn't add it. What would this lesson look like with respect to China, especially since in the U.S. now, in some ways, the U.S. competition with China and anti-communism seems to function more along that axis today. I don't know, Beanie, do you have anything to say that would, about either about China itself, but if you don't, about the question of linking this history to the Soviet experience exclusively, or what are your thoughts about that? I hope I'm not being
Beanie looks like they're like, what the fuck is your question?
I mean, I would really also be happy if someone else has any thoughts on that, especially like
Beanie has no thoughts.
How like something that as the Cold Wars feels to be returning now in the confrontation between US and China. And then maybe I can dive into the discussion at a later point, because I also need to get some water.
I do want to mention that we are having a panel, I'm not sure the exact date, check the Red May calendar, on reflecting about the Chinese Cultural Revolution with Alexandra Russo, who wrote a wonderful book about it from Duke University Press, and Assad Haider and Andrea Pizzi.
Rebecca Carl.
Rebecca's not on that one. Rebecca's on another one.
I'm sorry.
We have Andrea Piazzarola Longobardi, who wrote about the Shanghai Workers' Commune, and also Chris Connery. So it should be great. Check it out on the schedule.
But I guess my thinking was in asking this with, I mean, not really asking it to Beanie, but maybe asking it to the rest of us, is if this would be, is if one would need, if one were to accept the operation that Beanie's proposing, if one would have to go through each of these, like, are we just as much, we, and I'm not sure who the we is here, just as much the inheritors of the Chinese communist experience as we are of the Soviet, and of the Cuban communist experience as much as the Soviet? I mean, and each of them.
All right, we're continuing to argue via super chat. I'm sorry, guys. Like, I like money. I'm a capitalist. So if Neglectful Sausage wants to pay money to be wrong and to be dressed down in the chat, fine. Voluntary swarming other places and changing the society, forcing others to leave is legit tyranny of the majority. No, it's not, dude. Everything was voluntary. Everything was voluntary. So, she said she would be me. You're in my chat. I misconstrued her argument, re-CCP moving in. You are the authoritarian left. You are a psycho that really, like, you don't fucking belong here, dude. You don't fucking belong here. I haven't banned you yet because you seem to like to give me money. So I'll take your money and I will tell you that you are fucking wrong. You're not as smart as you think you are. And like, you're annoying the piss out of me because you're one of those people. You are probably one of those authoritarian conservatives that just spends all day whining, and being, I am a poor victim of the world, and why can't everyone just do what I want them to do, even though, like, I haven't done anything to convince them to do what I want them to do? You're one of these people who spends all day long fucking whining about how bad you have it in the world when you are completely unwilling to do anything about it. Thank you for the money. You're an authoritarian douche, and I hope you go somewhere else. Tom J. Americans moving states isn't the same as the CCP sending foreigners that can't vote. Aha! People voluntarily moving to a state is not the same thing as China shipping millions of people to a place where they didn't agree to go. Those are two completely different things. Thank you, Tom J. I appreciate it. Well, he's the one that's making the argument that it should be at the federal level. He's the one making that argument. I'm not making that argument.
I mean, would have comparable or roughly similar experiences, or is there something about the privileging of the Soviet experience that is separate? Maybe that's what I'm thinking with regard to.
He's like one of those conservatives that's like, everyone I disagree with is a leftist.
Standing in Berlin, it might look one way.
That's who Neglectful Sausage is.
In the United States, it might look another. That might be another way of posing this. If there were,
I have a sort of answer to that. I mean, it's not an answer, but a direction that might be interesting. You know, the famous statement that in terms of race, it's not, the problem isn't blackness, but whiteness. And I think
whiteness means capitalism. Whiteness means capitalism.
Anti-communism is the problem in terms of American thinking for a long time. It's so fundamental.
By anti-communism, he means capitalism.
You know, the traditional right, but essentially to liberals who are supposed to stand for the Enlightenment, and yet whose relation to Marx or the Soviet Union or any other thing is comparable to the right's relation to Darwin. They haven't read Darwin, but they got it from their pastor. Liberals haven't sort of read Marx's Capital, but they've read Isaiah Berlin or something. So they know there's nothing there. Because anti-communism is so scattershot, aimed essentially at everything, left and right, from Cuban to Chinese to Soviet, I think there is a virtue for focusing in on some specific experience, like the Soviet, like Bini does, and sort of taking us through that particular moment. So.
That's true. They don't know what to say.
Sorry that I was muted. That happens all the time these days. Here's another question. This is one really directed at Bini. Red May just had an event on Lukács and history and class consciousness. The figure of Stalin was missing from this, as well as the subject of the party. You ascribe to Lukács a kind of epistemology of vigilance. What do you mean by this? And can you talk about its historical and social expression? Okay, Bini, I'm not sure that I can represent the question adequately. Does it work for you, or should I go back to the question, see if we can?
An ontology of vigilance.
An epistemology of vigilance is what. But maybe the point, and this seems to me to speak directly to you, Bini, is about Lukács. You know that in working through Lukács, for instance, his history and class consciousness, does one have to, in reading that, in such an event, for instance, the other day at Red May on Lukács discussing history and class consciousness, is it required or productive, there we go, there to talk about the party and Stalin in relation to such discussions? In some ways I can imagine someone saying, look, we're doing a theoretical discussion now, we're working his theoretical book. We don't need to put it either with him or with Althusser, like their relationship to the party isn't what is in question here. We want to look at their theory. I have the sense that you think somewhat differently about that.
Yeah, because in a way, for me, it's amazing when you hear this kind of thinking from theorists who are part of a Marxist or materialist tradition, because it strikes me as a more idealist view on theory and the relation of theory to history. Like the materialist perspective, which also I take from theorists like Marx, teaches us, I think, something else, that theory and history, personality, psychology, and so on, economy are intertwined. And I would, of course, always say not in a reductionist way. So there's never no point in determination, but it is always worth to dig deeper and to think through these connections. Even if you take like an author like Alexandra Kollontai, who was anti-Leninist, but later remained silent about Stalinism. And then the question of, even with Alexandra Kollontai, the question occurs, how could she be like a diplomat for the Stalinist bureaucracy after everything she'd done and written, and after knowing that all her comrades from the workers' opposition had basically been killed by this very regime. And with Lukács, Lukács appears in Yesterday's Tomorrow in this meeting of German writers, and he's not a writer in this sense. He's the philosopher in the room, but this is like this perch where they sit together, and they have to declare their failures and have to declare where they were not obeying the party line. And in this, you can really see that Lukács is acting in a classical Stalinist way, and you can also see this in some of its theoretical works, right? Very clearly in his opposition. So to Konrad.
I think I'm not representing the questioner, okay. And the questioner might have to excuse me for this, but I just want to clarify something the way you're saying it, because it seems to me that you're saying, like, reading Lukács this way.
I just want to hang on. I just want to point out this chat from Mansa, because it's really good. Intellectuals will say simple things in a hard way. An artist will say hard things in a simple way. That's definitely what we're watching here. Like this guy, he has been a nightmare since the beginning of this presentation. This guy, like he like makes no sense. And just so we're all clear, this guy is teaching undergraduates right now. He told us that earlier in the presentation. He makes no sense at all. He is like, even Beanie, I think, is having trouble understanding what he's actually asking. Now, to Beanie's credit, and again, I actually like Beanie. I don't know, maybe like in another life, Beanie, like actually, and I might get along, because I think that like Beanie actually, the reason I say that is not because I agree with Beanie being a communist, but because it does feel like Beanie is at least trying to take an intellectually honest view of this. I say that with some trepidation, but more intellectually honest than I think most people in this space are. And I don't know, like, they haven't said anything that I found like overtly offensive, if I'm honest about it. But like this intellectual is like, I don't have any use for him at all. But like Beanie, I think is fine. Beanie does have a different energy, doesn't she? Said Beanie does have a different energy. Like, I really don't have much issue with anything that Beanie has said in this chat. Or in this stream. I really don't. I mean, like, we clearly have different views of the world. We clearly have different things that we believe. But people are allowed to believe different things. And it's like, you know, Beanie strikes me as one of those people who really believes that like this stuff can work if it's just implemented correctly. And I think we do have to give points for the fact that they acknowledge that, you know, mistakes have been made. And it seems to me, here's what it is. It seems to me that Beanie wrote the book that we're talking about in this presentation at a time when it was probably deeply unpopular in the communist sphere to have written the book that they wrote. Because it seems like what happened is Beanie wrote the book that we're talking about now in 2007, I think is when they said. But then many years later, like this is May 2021, so like 15 years later, 15 years later, they wrote a book called Communism for Kids. And that book got some negative backlash for reasons that I think are pretty self-explanatory. And when they wrote Communism for Kids, their earlier book got brought back up again and discussed again. But it seems to me like they wrote that book when it was deeply unpopular to have those opinions in that space. And I have to give credit for that, man. I have to give points for that. I do. I have to give points for that. And I don't think you always need to agree with people in order to give them points. Yeah, Beanie is an artist and not an academic. I agree. I would actually like to have a conversation with Beanie, if I'm honest. After watching this, I would like to have a conversation.
Like, recognizing his Stalinist behavior in this meeting means that we can take nothing good from history and class consciousness, or that we shouldn't read Lukács or something like that. And the only reason I'm saying, because this is, I think, your attitude in the entire book, which is we can have the strength to recognize these things without them disqualifying what's the tradition and the parts involved. But I think the reason it's important to bring up or to clarify or to insist on it, because I think I can think of all kinds of homologous or analogous relations that it's not uncommon to say, you know, for instance, we should get out of the Marxist tradition with this. I was going to say, like since, that something in, I don't know, Nietzsche's a misogynist, for instance, which of course, like super is, no doubt about that. But that doesn't mean you can't read Nietzsche. That shouldn't disqualify us from even reading Nietzsche for feminist purposes. And so I was thinking in the same way that you're recognizing these material conditions and political positions, you're not intending to, I guess I'm trying to clarify that with you. You're not intending to say, therefore, we need to read everything that person wrote through the lens of, I don't know, their Stalinist activity or something like that. It helped me. I'm not quite saying it right, but I'm just trying to avoid a misunderstanding of the way you're approaching it. That's what I'm trying to do.
No, I mean, what I'm saying is that we have to get rid of this illusion of innocence, in either way. We cannot find an innocent Marx, and a Marx that is like innocent, has nothing to do, is completely irresponsible for what happened afterwards. That doesn't mean we have to get rid of Marx. This would be this illusion of innocence. Find somebody else who is like completely holy, who we can pray upon or something. No, we have to think through. I think one theorist who does it wonderfully is Susan Buckmorse in the book Hegel in Haiti, where she says it is actually, let's say, a theory, the hypothesis, it's this division of labor also in the sciences and the humanities that causes these distinctions. There are some historians who work on the racism of Kant and Hegel, and there's philosophers who work on the theory. And since there's this division in labor in the studies in the sciences, they don't come together. And there's also like no desire or affect or emotions in bringing them together. And then she says how strange it is for her when there's this one scholar who says, yeah, but then also this is plainly racist what Hegel says, and it's not just zeitgeist.
Oh, neglectful sausage is back. We've got more argument coming in the super chat. We've got more argument and whining coming in the super chat. I'll display it on the screen, dude. I'm not going to read it at this point because you are absolutely ignorant and not understanding the argument. And you're doing what every conservative whiner does in my chat, except you're paying me money to do it, which is why I'm acknowledging you at all at this point. So you want to keep paying me money, I guess I'll keep acknowledging it. But like, dude, you have like bot is absolutely correct. You have a BDSM fetish. Like, you really should work that out, dude. Go see a dominatrix. You need to go see a dominatrix because you have a BDSM fetish. I'm telling you right now, you are wrong. You are willfully wrong. You are willfully misinterpreting the things that I said, and you're paying me money to do it. So I'm a capitalist. I'll keep taking your money, but I'm not going to read your chat, and I'm not going to engage with your arguments anymore because there is no point in arguing with whiny-ass authoritarian conservatives who are willing to willfully misconstrue the arguments that are being made, probably because they aren't smart enough to understand them in the first place.
So, but does it mean that you cannot work with Hegel? It would be crazy. But it means that you have to work in a certain way with it. Be responsible, working through it.
So, I mean, I think you have a dialogue from Mana Sperber in the book during the Purge trials of interrogation, which really demonstrates how incapacitated this unexamined sense of innocence leaves a person before the kind of before interrogation. And it's when someone says I'm going to testify in the trials against Comrade Stalin of all the bad things he's done. I'm not going to say what you want me to say. I'm going to go against this whole proceedings. And the interrogator says things like, well, did you feel that we were wrong at Kronstadt? Or did you feel they were wrong? And it goes through everything for the last 10 years. And the guy says, yes, I do. I think it was the wrong track. And the interrogator says, but you said nothing. So after establishing about 10 years of having said nothing, the interrogator then says, so you say nothing, but at the moment your own life is threatened. You're the person who needs to sacrifice himself to maintain the party. You speak up. What is that worth? And so forth. And it's a devastating argument. How do you come back to that? You know? And so you can almost say that in order not to have to answer that particular thing, it's important to speak out at every moment. So.
Yeah, exactly. I think that it is important to work through this, and I think it's not an historical question, no? And it's not a specific question of the Soviet Union. You cannot get rid of it and say, okay, these are very specific historical circumstances. I think that the history of the Soviet Union poses a more principal question. And if you think through Stalinism, if you think through the logic of Stalinism, and that is also what is interesting when confronting the question, you realize it's not just stupid, you know, it's not just dumb, it's not only reactionary.
True.
But there is some truth to it.
True.
There's some argument to that you will find tempting, right? When the Stalin said, what good is it if you are on the right side, if you are morally right, if you don't have the power to make it right? What good does it do? It's a very strong argument, and of course, like Leninism and Stalinism, they follow this logic to a point where it turns completely around, but it makes sense to think through it.
Beanie just said something really interesting that is very and they said it in like the nicest possible way. And so I almost missed it because they said it in a really nice way. And so this is like a lesson. Oh God, fucking neglectful sausage is back with additional arguing. Okay, well, we'll address that in a second after we do actual work here, with neglectful sausage continuing to show his BDSM fetish in the chat by continuing to pay me money to spank him like the little bitch that he is. But but Beanie just said was essentially like, it's not enough to like want to make the world better. You have to like have power to make the world better. And if you don't have the power, then you can't actually do anything, which is deeply reflective. And we're going to listen to it again in a second before we deal with the super chat insanity that's going on right now. That's actually really reflective, because what these people care about more than anything else is power. Everything they do is about power. So let's listen to that again. Actually, that was way too far back. Hang on.
Tempting, right? When the Stalin said, what good is it if you are on the right side, if you are morally right, if you don't have the power to make it right? What good does it do? It's a very strong
you don't have the power
argument.
to make
and
it right.
Course,
what good does it do?
Leninism and Stalinism, they follow this logic to a point where it turns completely around, but it makes sense to think through it. And I wanted to add something to the discussion earlier.
Now let's go back and deal with the troll that I have in my chat that is continuing to pay money to troll me. I feel really bad for you, dude. You're out like, how much money have you spent on me tonight? Like $75? You're the one who is spending money to argue with me. So I actually feel really bad for you. You own the Federalist Papers. Congratulations. You own a book. So do I. So do lots of people. Just have you read that book? Have you read it recently? Have you read the Federalist Papers recently? Or are you just blowing all your beer money on fucking super chats arguing with someone who has already spanked your ass on several occasions? So I'm not going to read your super chat. I don't care to be in this argument anymore. But if you want to keep paying me money, I'll take your money, man.
Earlier, because one possible outcome of this debate could be, or one possible reading of this could be, that now, like for example, yesterday's tomorrow, or I propose an argument that goes like, anti-communists are not able to understand the terror of communism. Only communists are able to understand the terror of Stalinism, which then...
Wait, what? Anti-communists are not able to understand the horrors of communism? Bro. Come on. Beanie, you literally started this presentation talking about the millions of people that Stalin killed. That's how you started this presentation. And you're telling me that people who are against communism just can't understand the horrors of communism? Let's listen to that again. That was beyond.
What good does it do? It's a very strong argument. And of course, like Leninism and Stalinism, they follow this logic to a point where it turns completely around. But it makes sense to think through it. And I wanted to add something to the discussion.
Yeah, I'm sure
earlier,
the people in the Gulag didn't understand it all.
One possible outcome of this debate could be, or one possible reading of this could be, that now, like for example, yesterday's tomorrow, or I propose an argument that goes like, anti-communists are not able to understand the terror of communism. Only communists are able to understand the terror of Stalinism, which then means that I propose some kind of like communist identity politics.
That doesn't even make sense.
The history of communism is our history.
That doesn't even make sense.
And we are the only ones who could deal with it. And I would strongly recommend not to go in this identitarian direction. But
I'm not displaying that super chat. I'm not playing into this any longer.
That everybody who is really convinced that we need to change the social structure of present times, social structure of, as you mentioned, Michael, patriarchy, colonialism, capitalism, and really wants to build a different society. For everybody who really wants to change the world,
Isn't it funny that Neglectful Sausage is complaining about the fact that I said that if people move to his state and change the politics there, then he can either get on board or he can get the fuck out, when he has completely, for the last hour and a half, taken over my chat and forced all of us to go along with his bullshit by sending these repeated super chats. Isn't that funny? Isn't that funny? That he doesn't want people voluntarily moving to a state, but he wants to take over and hold hostage an entire fucking stream to make his feelings feel a little bit better about being an authoritarian conservative that can't stand anyone that disagrees. Neglectful Sausage, you chat in one more time, I'm just blocking your ass. We're fucking done. Like, I'm done. I don't even care. It is not worth the additional $10, dude. It is not worth the $10 at all in any way. I don't want you here. GTFO.
This history of people who also wanted to change the world, but had a different outcome than they wanted it originally, is like a very important lesson, you know, whether they identify as communists or not. It's not a question of identity, of identifying, but this is a real historical and more than historical questions that are posed by this history. How can you overcome domination without becoming
goodbye, Neglectful Sausage? You just got blocked.
Domination yourself.
Thanks for the money.
I would say we have two. I think maybe we should do at the same time 2 questions on our live feed. In fact, why don't Sean, you go second, and you know, I don't know who the name behind Fabs the Rocket is. Well, let's just go Fabs the Rocket. Why don't you go first?
Hello? Can you hear me?
Hello.
Yes.
Yes, we can hear you.
Oh, that's a great voice.
Beanie,
oh my
thank
God.
you so much. Your book sounds as wonderful in English as it does in German. Yeah, I have a question regarding, because the book is about failure and about how the left has failed to deal with that failure in any manner, actually. And also, and now, so for me, the question is, as I'm working a lot with homeless people and organizing a lot with homeless people, and now we have to form a support group because homeless people get discriminated by leftists, is the ever reoccurring fact that although people, especially from the radical left, should know that they very probably are very broken, Yeah, because that is what capitalism does. English. So yeah, my question would be, can you imagine an actual culture of embracing, I guess, a more like an idea of discovery, I guess, so that being wrong, also on a very personal level, like in your own activist group, in your own writing or whatever, that failure, actually becomes the necessity that it is right now in this society, and with
What is he
power relations
saying?
as they are. Yeah. Is
That
that
mean-
even a question?
Is he on drugs?
I think, yeah, Beanie, can you hold on to that for a second?
That made
And
no
we have
sense.
Sean's question, even if they're separate. I think it's good to have, more voices in the discussion.
He's like, dude, you made
I'm
no
holding on
sense.
to your question too, in case I don't want it to get lost. Go ahead, Sean.
Howdy, all. Again, Beanie, thank you so much for doing this. It's been just such a pleasure to listen in and be a part of this and have you with us. I am notoriously long-winded and tangential, so I wrote this down to keep it short.
Oh, good.
So just bear with me real quick. So in the chapter titled Revolution, you talk about the figure of Lenin, but as Lenin
That's
the
probably
undead,
treo. That's
neither
probably
present
true.
nor absent, neither dead nor living, neither body nor spirit. We meet Lenin as Lenin, Lenin as corpse, Lenin as geolocation, Lenin as spectacle, and ultimately Lenin the betrayer of Kronstadt. And so this part of the book seemed pretty important to me in our contemporary context, where we're seeing sort of like Lenin's great revival and in movement use and in organizational purposes. So my question is, what do you think we should do with Lenin today? And do you think his contemporary rebirth is the Lenin of the revolution or the Lenin of the mausoleum? So, thank you.
Beanie, I'm not asking you to do these two together. I don't think you can put them together, but
well, having said that, that we have to think through the interconnectedness of theory, politics, economy, history, and so on. I would also find it hard to find this one way of dealing with Lenin, like this one perspective or this one sentence, or the one truth to finish it up. But in fact, if we dive in the history of the Russian Revolution, I think it is a bit weird why it is exactly Lenin who gets so much attention. It's not completely weird. There's reason to, but I think it is worthy to remember different communist activists even more. In a way, I think it's like also we're going into the very bourgeois trap of remembering or imagining.
Oh no, not a bourgeois trap!
Great men, their decisive decisions that they make, their courage, and so on. Even if you look precisely at the history of the Bolshevik Party, only the Bolshevik Party, as the historian Alexander Rabinovich has greatly in his book, The First Year, where he focuses only on the first year, you can see that even in the Bolshevik Party, there's like many different factions. That there's Bolsheviks who are open to forming alliances with the Social Democrats, the Social Revolutionaries, anarchists, the Mensheviks, and so on. And you can see, I think, very precisely that in the first year, almost every decision that was made by Lenin against the majority of the party, usually against the majority of the party, was wrong. And starting with the October, the putsch, the march at the Winter Palais, where most of the members in the Bolshevik Party were against it, were advising against it, were overruled. So it would be, I think, even more interesting even though I look at the revolution not as a revolution of a party, but of course as the revolution of a multitude, or an ensemble of micro-revolutions, as I call it, I think it is more interesting to look at the Bolshevik party than it would be interesting to look at Lenin. Because I think there are some traditions in there that can also be more useful to the present time, and here I will try to build this connection to your question, perhaps, because of course we can see that there is this very particular Leninist tradition, which is exactly unable to admit to failure and to weakness and to ambiguity and ambivalence and so on. And there's other traditions who are more open to these tones than it is Lenin. You know? If you just only look at the words that Lenin and Trotsky use the most, it is, for example, a word like "without compromise." This idea that a radical politics has to be without compromise is something very vivid in them, and there's other traditions who can give us a different approach. But I'm also hesitant to take like lessons from history and place them just in a different historical setting, because I'm also thinking this is not just about, you know, habitus, about like a Haltung, about the way you position yourself. It's like, you know, 5 steps to be a bit better communist, but it's of course the historical conditions that allow us, that enable us, or make it difficult to go in a different direction. And if you find yourself in a situation of strong opposition, in a binary situation, it gets very, very complicated to move out of it. It's just what Micah said, is like during the Cold War, it is much more difficult to write a book that is like somehow beyond this dichotomy than afterwards. But one last sentence to the question of Lenin. There is, and it also goes back to the beginning of our talk, there's this very interesting remark of Eva von Redeker, philosopher Eva von Redeker, who says that often she finds that those Leninists, those philosophers today, going back to Lenin, that they mistake that which provokes the bourgeoisie the most, with that which is most radical. If you side with Lenin, if you quote Lenin, this seems to be very radical because it provokes you know your enemy very, very much. But this does not mean that this position is the most radical. And this is also connected to the question of like our notion of communism. The topic.
Oh, she admits a lot of it. Actually, she admits a lot of it.
I think it is important to go beyond this determined negation, you know, bestimmte Negation, which thinks that communism is just the opposite of capitalism. It's just the opposite of domination. It is not. It's neither the job of communists to create a world that is completely new, that has no connections to the old world. You know, that would be a fetish. Nor is it the job to create a world, a communism, that is like the exact opposite, the exact negation of capitalism. That would be, in a way, still too related to this domination. But communism is communism when it is exactly like a communal society in which everybody is equal in the regard in this, that they can freely create the world they're living in. You know, so it is.
Beanie is confusing communism with libertarianism, and actually they said it earlier, and they said they libertarian communist. So these are people who like believe that if you give the state control over everything, then we can truly be free and live our lives and become artists and do all those things. That's what they believe. Now, I would argue that that's not realistic or correct. Yes, real communism has never been tried. That's exactly right. Yeah, she's confused. She's probably spent way too much time in academia, if we're honest about it. She's probably spent way too much time in academia.
It is a positive goal. It's not a negative goal.
Like the
It's not
goal that
about
Beanie has is
overcoming
noble, but it's
discrimination. It's about
libertarian, and she just doesn't
creating,
understand that it's not
solidary
communist.
relations.
Beanie, I just want to refer to a quote that you have somewhere in the book where you say, essentially, Leninism is a creation of Stalin. And I think it's important to remember that.
See, isn't the chat so much nicer now that we've blocked
because
neglectful
one can
sausage?
find
This is why you
many
curate the chat.
examples of a flexible Lenin
So
as
much
one goes
nicer.
along, even though he's come to stand for inflexibility and absolutely the most radical position. And there's a famous quote about someone saying to him in 1906, wait, you're telling us to take positions in the assembly now, and last year you said we shouldn't, that would be reformism. He says, last year we were powerful, now we're not. Or, you know, that famous line, which I wish I could remember exactly, which is, we had no plan, we just made it up as we went along. You know, against that whole Richard Pipes school of history, which says the Bolsheviks came in with this plan for installing a top-down command government. So, you know, I also want to sort of go against what I said earlier. The focus on these events and so forth is that I think a kind of ragtag approach to the Soviet Union and the Second World, where one finds little elements that float to the surface that you find very interesting. It didn't necessarily take shape because of the plan of the central government or the party, but just simply happened because capitalism wasn't operating in a particular area. The fact, for example, that the Soviet Union produced so many great mathematicians. I mean, what they say is that Stalin was the chief scientist in biology, but he didn't understand mathematics. So he just gave these guys blackboards in an institute and chalk, and they sat there for 30 years, absent from all the pressures that administrations in capitalist education put on all departments now. And by the time they sort of left the Soviet Union, they were doing such great stuff that Western departments snatched them up right away. I just mentioned that as not to mitigate what we were talking about, but to try to encourage many approaches to the second world. But there's still a lot to be interested in and look at.
This guy just likes to hear himself talk.
What you bring up the central point to our own development of communism.
I just wanted to link back to something that Fab Sarak had said before and then I think we're probably going to try to think about tying things up, you know, because we're getting near the time. But it occurs to me that, you know, because when you, Fab Sarak, we're talking about the failures and the, in some ways, history of failures, and I think that reading Beanie's work, one could focus on that. On the failures, I'm just wondering. I realize that.
But let's talk about the successes of communism, shall we? Can we talk about the successes of communism instead of focusing on the failures?
I'm translating myself into defeat. So not thinking of failure.
Let's talk about the successes.
And it means something different to me. And I'm just wondering if I'm putting my own slant on it that doesn't fit.
Yes,
because with
you are, Michael.
It seems to me.
Yes.
It's
that's exactly and precisely what you're doing. Congratulations.
In some ways, there's continuity to the struggle. There's continuity to the struggle because it was, you know, it was their own limitations that had them defeated, or even the circumstances around them. You know, I'm not interested.
He had an epiphany, and now he's going to talk his way out of it.
Of Lenin, or even of Stalin. It's, you know, if I had been in that situation, would I have done differently?
Let's redefine defeat so it doesn't seem like we were defeated.
It's more that. Is that the project was defeated, and that we. Yeah, I'm very tied to this idea that the struggle, you know, that people conduct this struggle, that it doesn't come out the way they thought, that it may be even differently than what we wanted, and we pick up the struggle and and take it in a different direction, so that we have to keep struggling under this, even under this banner. I think Beanie talks sometime about picking up the red flags from the mud or something like that. Rather than thinking that we have to either exorcise or cut from our history all of these bad elements or bad decisions, I think for me, if I translate it into, or this, I find myself translating into questions about defeat, and that seems something, a quite different relationship to that history. I mean, maybe even start closer to home. I mean, it was very important for many people, and me included, it after Occupy Wall Street, to recognize that it's not that Occupy Wall Street failed, it was defeated. It could have been defeated for all kinds of its own reasons too. It doesn't mean that everyone did everything right or something like that. But it's not because it was a failed idea. It was because, partly for military response to the police and other things defeated it.
I want to see some libertarian that knows more about libertarianism than I do have a conversation
I would say that
with
the
Beanie about
Soviet experience too
libertarianism.
was a defeat rather than it failed. And Beanie's not on board with that one. But anyway,
I should
trying
make
it out.
Beanie have a
I was
conversation with
wondering what it
Dennis.
changes. That's okay. I'm speaking a little hypothetically. And I think I had Beanie going for a little while, and then she realized she wasn't with me.
No, I mean, as I said, I find very helpful this distinction between defeat and failure that I take from Enzo Traverso. And in this, defeat is something that is brought to you like from the outside, like that's from the counter-revolution, from the White Army. And so I agree, the Paris Commune is defeated.
We're the White Army.
And, Occupy
They're
Wall
the
Street
Red
is
Army.
defeated, of
We're
course,
the White Army.
very differently, but yes. But the Soviet
As in
Union
whiteness, as in
was not
capitalism.
defeated, and this is also what makes it so special.
I do know
It is
Clint.
the
Yeah, Clint's a
first
good guy.
socialist revolution that is not defeated, but it is able to defend itself against imperialism, against counter-revolution. Of course, you can bring back the question whether the outer conditions, the imperialist struggle,
I agree.
or
He's
war,
a really good guy.
on a
Really
military
good
and
guy.
economical perspective, fed into this development, and were maybe like finally responsible for the defeat in 1989. Yes, I would say 1989, 1990, the Soviet Union collapses, but it is also defeated. But prior to this defeat is a failure. And this is what I said earlier about 1921. In 1921, the Bolsheviks, the socialists, are victorious. They have won over the counter-revolution, and they could have more communism, as you said earlier. It would have been possible at this time in history, even before, to have a more communist society, which would also be more advertising for communism than that which followed after. And that this communist, like solidary, libertarian, egalitarian communism.
Communism and libertarianism are not the same thing.
Mainly the responsible of counter-revolution, mainly the responsibility, or only the responsibility.
This is the main confusion that Beanie has.
But also,
does libertarianism mean something differently in Europe?
This is why here I talk about failure. And so
I'm really asking. I don't know the answer to that.
And it raises different kind of questions.
So I think we're about to wrap up here, even though we have more questions. I do want to take Bruno's comment because Bruno has studied the fiction of Antoine Volodine and has a very interesting comment on the defeat of the Soviet experience from jailed revolutionaries who took up writing in prison. It'd be fun to leave. Bruno, can you translate that from French?
What's her Twitter?
Sure.
John, what's her Twitter?
Yeah. They ruminated on the promises that hadn't been accomplished, and they as writers, they invented worlds where the defeat was just as systematic and bitter.
Oh, never mind. I found her.
In what you call the real world. And just briefly, what's always interested me is that it takes account of the tragedy of communism, at least in the Soviet Union, without repudiating communist desires, it seems to me, although it does it by by making it into a tragedy. And so I'm not sure there's much future involved. So anyway, thank you for letting me slip that in there.
All right. Well,
Make
thanks.
this reading.
Thanks, everybody. And thanks very much, Beanie, for beaming yourself from Germany to take part in this discussion. I do want to say, and thank you for Michael for being such a channeler of.
Wait. Okay, so we're wrapping this up, but I have to show you guys this. Holy shit. I just looked up Beanie on Twitter because John found her and he alerted. And so I looked at the link on Beanie's profile. And so it brought me to MIT Press, which is where they're publishing her books, right? And here's Communism for Kids. And guess who? This is how incestuous this little communism community is. Guess who Communism for Kids is translated by? Sophie Lewis. Sophie Lewis. Does that name sound familiar to anyone? Sophie Lewis. Sophie Lewis is one of the translators of the Communism for Kids book. Who is Sophie Lewis? Where have we seen Sophie Lewis show up before? Does anyone know? Anyone in the chat? Any guesses? We've seen Sophie Lewis twice. Sophie Lewis is the woman that wrote is the woman that wants all children to be born via surrogacy. She's the feminist, with the red hair, that wants all children to be born by surrogacy so that we can dissolve the biological family and have everyone beholden to the state because you're getting rid of all biological kinship. That's who Sophie Lewis is. Isn't it funny? This small, little, incestuous world of the socialists. All right, guys. Well, it's funny. I was actually thinking about watching a Sophie Lewis video today. We got Sophie Lewis by osmosis into this video. I didn't think this was like the worst thing we've ever watched, though. I mean, it was kind of interesting. It was interesting to hear communists confuse libertarianism and communism repeatedly. It was interesting to hear how they're using words and language to basically say the same thing, but to trick people into thinking it's something else. Yes, Sophie Lewis wants to get rid of all biological families. That's very true. So I didn't think that was the worst presentation we've ever watched, but that YouTube channel has a treasure trove of stuff on it. There's so much I want to watch on it, and we might gonna have to do that for a different time for a different day. Real quick. 2 quick things before we go. Number 1, look at my knitting. I am working on the Westnitz Mystery Yarn-Along shawl. I have several more rows of this black and white braided thing to go, but isn't that cool? Isn't that a cool pattern? I fucking love this. I've never done this technique before. It's so cool. So I'm really excited about the thing that I'm knitting, and I think it looks great. But guys, just so you know, if you would like to join us tomorrow on the supporter Discord, we are having movie night at 8 p.m. tomorrow. We're going to be watching The Crow. I'm very excited about it. If you would like to get access to the supporter Discord, there are many ways you can do that. The primary ones are becoming a monthly supporter on either Patreon or on Locals. The links to both Patreon and Locals, as well as Substack and some other stuff, is on activelyunwoke.com/support. You can also find it in the description below. I definitely recommend Locals. If you had to choose between the two, I would definitely recommend Locals, but I know some people have issues with that. Some people have issues with Patreon. Whatever. You can join on whichever one, and you're going to be able to get access to the supporter Discord to join us for The Crow and for all future movie nights as well. So I'm looking forward to seeing some of you tomorrow for movie night. I think it's going to be a great time. I have not seen this movie in probably 15 years. And so I'm really looking forward to it. And just so you guys know, Jennifer also in Locals did post a link to a documentary about the movie and about Brandon Lee's death to school us all on what really happened. I think it's going to be a really fun time. So we did our homework today. We watched Socialism for about 3.5 hours, and now we get to let our hair down for the rest of the weekend. Guys, please mount that like button on the way out the door. Please subscribe to the channel if you have not already. We do Socialism Saturday at 6 p.m. on Saturdays pretty regularly, fairly regularly. And so maybe you can join us next time. I do other content throughout the week as well. Whatever you like, whatever you don't like, don't watch, don't click on that particular thing. Whatever's clever. All right, I'm going to go keep knitting. And I'll see you guys tomorrow for movie night. Bye.